All right, my friends, thank you guys so much for hanging with us on our live show. We're a little bit late today. I apologize for that. Have some audio issues, but it seems like we worked through them, so that's always a good thing. So I apologize for the late start getting started on the show. If you're new to the show, we do broadcast live every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. We try our best to start broadcasting at 10:45 a.m. Pacific time. So if you guys want to join the live show and interact with everyone and ask questions, we do our best to start at 10:45 a.m. Pacific time, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So this is episode 635 of the podcast. So if you guys want to grab the show notes or the links to any of the things that we talk about, to our sponsors, to the guest website, anything like that, just go to extremehealthradio.com and just remember /635, and you can grab the show notes for this particular show on our website. And let me give you a little update on some upcoming guests that we have going on. Pretty cool stuff. We've got lots of stuff happening on the show. Gosh, I swear we're just really talking to some really amazing people. So let me pull up our schedule here so you guys can take a look. Today is going to be Amy Proal. We're going to be talking about the human microbiome, and I will introduce her in just a second. Then on Wednesday, Judy Singer, and we're going to be talking about cancer, detox, natural therapies, stuff like that. And then this Friday, we're going to have Bob Troya. He's AKA Quantified Bob. So that should be a fun show. He's like a real biohacker and just into all this kind of high-end, cutting edge stuff. So that'll be a fun show. Then on Monday, December 3rd, we're going to have Matt Blackburn, and we'll be talking with him on fasting, longevity, stuff like that. And then Andy Mann is a cool guy. We'll be talking with him about blue light and the blue light toxicity and what it does to your DHA and your, to your eyes and to your nervous system and brain and all that kind of stuff. So that'll be a fun show with Andy Mann. And then today we have Amy Proal, and this is going to be awesome because I had heard about her years ago when we were doing some research on the Marshall Protocol, and in that, I think it was an interview, she shared a lot of what was going on with her with autoimmune diseases, specifically Lyme disease, which was a crazy story that she has coming back from that. And that story of her is just unreal. So and so I knew always that I wanted to reach out to her because she was, had some really interesting information about the microbiome, autoimmune diseases, and stuff like that. So today we're going to be talking about what exactly is the human microbiome. Most people just think it's bacteria in the gut, but it extends out, she says, to the blood, to the tissues, contains viruses and stuff like that. So we'll be talking all about the human microbiome and what we can learn about it so that we can become healthier. And she's a graduate of Georgetown University in 2005 with a degree in biology. And when she was there, she wrote her senior thesis on the role of infectious agents and chronic fatigue syndrome. In 2002, she obtained a PhD in microbiology from Murdoch University in Australia. And her graduate thesis focused on autoimmune diseases re-examined in the light of metagenomic concepts. So this will be a cool. But I can't even say that. So thanks so much, Amy, for being on the show today.
It's great to be here. Thanks for your intro.
Yeah, no, like I said in the intro, I'd heard you years ago, and I think when I first heard you, you were in Mexico, right? Oh no, your audio just went blank on us, just like it was before the show, unfortunately. Oh no, I can't hear you anymore. Bummer. I wonder what happened. Your audio is turned up on my side. I'm sorry, guys. I don't know what's going on with Amy's, her audio. Can you hear me okay, Amy? How weird is that? Wow, all of a sudden your audio was good, and then all of a sudden it went bad. Did anything happen on your end, Amy, that could have caused this, do you think? We just spent about a half hour before the show trying to get audio going. And Amy, I can't hear you for some reason. If you could type in that little chat box, I could probably... I apologize, guys. This is the modern technology for you. So... I don't know what to do because neither Amy nor I are audio technical geeky kind of people. So when these things happen on live shows, it's kind of challenging. We just had the audio working, and for some reason, I don't know what happened. It just stopped working. So we'll continue to work on this for a couple more minutes and see if we can get it back. And I'd love to have her on sharing her story and all of her work on the human microbiome to you guys. I'm seeing everything here on my end is good. Looks like Amy maybe froze, so maybe she's going to try reconnecting here. Okay, so it says here it's reconnected. No, I can't hear you at all. How bizarre is that? Yeah. Huh. I don't know what to do. It sounds like, are you on the old PC, Amy? Or I'm sorry, the old Mac? Or the new one? You know what? Maybe try this. Maybe try rebooting your computer and going into it from Chrome. And if it works, then we can do that. So maybe try rebooting your computer and then try re-entering the call with Google Chrome and see if that helps. And then if not, we can try something else. So I'll just hang out here with the listeners until we come back with you. All right, guys. So, oh wait, whoops. Okay, I thought I heard myself, but okay, I did. All right, guys. Well, I apologize for all of this craziness with vMix here. It sounds like Amy's going to reboot her computer. Want to give you a quick update if you guys are just coming into the show. Upcoming shows this Wednesday, guys, make sure to check out the show that we're going to have with Judy Singer about cancer detox and natural therapies. That's going to be a cool show on Wednesday. And Quantified Bob, that's going to be a cool show on Friday. He's really, like I said before, like a biohacker, and he's really into like doing all these, cold thermogenesis and light therapy and all this crazy kind of cool stuff. So Quantified Bob, his website might be quantifiedbob.com. I have to check that out. And then a lot of you guys have been asking to have Matt Blackburn back on, because we had him on years ago, or not years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, I'd say. And he's a really fun guy, friend of our show. Love the guy, love the work that he's doing. Really interesting, unique take on health and nutrition and stuff like that. So Matt Blackburn's going to be on next Monday. We are working on getting some new microphones for that one too. So Andy Mann is going to be on 4 p.m. That same day, next Monday, because he's in Perth, Australia. So we'll be talking with him about light and how light affects our biology. It's unbelievable when you start realizing that light affects our body more than you think it does. And so so we got Amy back. Unfortunately, I can't hear you at all. Oh my goodness. Maybe if you can type Amy in the chat room or in that little call kind of chat thing and let me know what you were just saying there. But yeah, so she changed to another laptop, but for some reason we're still having another issue here. It looks like she rebooted. I apologize, guys. This is kind of what happens when you do live shows. That sometimes these things work and don't work, and have real issues with what's going on with technology today. So I apologize. Jojo Bach in the chat room. I'll just hang out with you guys in the chat room until we get Amy back. This is always fun. I just got done watching a video from 9 months ago with you, Dr. Bergman, and Kate, the 3 stressors. No way. Cool. Kate is here. Kate, how are the kids at home? Are they doing good? Okay, so hopefully they're still sleeping. So Mark says he can't hear. Yeah, Mark, we're working on that right now. We're having some real issues with Amy's microphone. We had it working perfectly, and then all of a sudden something happened. So we're working on that. If we have to reschedule the show, maybe we'll reschedule it. What a bust. Yeah, I know. Soon you will be with the little ones in the background. I know, right? We're going to have the little guys in the background. If you guys have been following our Instagram, you'll see our little kids. We're never sure if it's too much to post on Instagram or if it's not enough to post. I know a lot of you guys say that you guys like to see our little kids, but it's fun for us because Kate and I have been married for 13 years, and really been focusing on a lot of personal work that we've been doing, personal care work and healing and things like that. And so it was a long time coming with having kids, and so for us, it's just a thrill. So. Yeah, we'll bring the little ones, JoJo, in the background. That'll be fun. Let's see. Let's see if Amy's having any better luck. No, no better luck here. So she's just paused here. So yeah. JoJo says she misses hearing Kate on the show as well. I know we are. We're working with Kate, and hopefully we can get her back on the show. Um, Miss seeing you and hearing you. Hi, Justin. Hi, from Holland. Wow, no way. Mark, that's right. You're from Holland. That's so cool. Yeah. Nicholas says sometimes rebooting helps. Yeah, It's always the sort of cure all for these types of things, right? It's like fasting with people, right? It's like the most simple thing that you can ever do for improving your health. It's just to simply lay off food for a while, let your body do some healing. So let's see here. Hope you guys are having a great Monday. Yeah, it's the 26th, the Monday after Thanksgiving, if you're here in the United States. Did you guys have a good Thanksgiving in the chat room? Did you have any interesting conversations with your family members? Did they think you were crazy? Did they make fun of you for eating a diet a little bit different from theirs? Or is your family all on board with what you're doing? That's always something I think would be really cool, is to have a family completely on board with what you're doing with regards to your health. Okay, Amy, I see you're back, but still no audio. That is just crazy.
Ugh,
There we go.
really? You can hear me?
I heard you.
Okay.
Oh my goodness. What?
This is my
What?
whole laptop. All right,
Oh
let's
my.
just. Okay, I will not understand the audio of these laptops, but
It's just not happening, right?
well, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can still hear you. So it sounded like something happened last time when we were talking, that maybe you accidentally unplugged something, or did that happen?
No, I had no understanding. You were talking. I heard the whole intro. I was stoked to go, and then all of a sudden, I couldn't hear you anymore. Oh,
Oh
right.
my, that's crazy. So I was just talking about Thanksgiving. How was your Thanksgiving? I didn't even ask you.
It was good. It was good. Actually, my most of my family went to Florida where my mom lives, but I hung out here with a couple friends, and it was fun.
Oh, that's
Got
cool.
some fun too. Actually, it was kind of chill, but good.
Yeah, yeah. So it's like a Friendsgiving.
Pretty much, yeah. More of a Thanksgiving, yeah. But then my family that I live nearby came back, and we had a different dinner like the day after. So it was
Yeah. Nice, nice. That's cool. Yeah.
yeah.
I was sharing with you, or to the audience, a little bit before, in the intro, just to get people up to speed a little bit about your story, and how you came back from what you thought was Lyme disease, right? And if you could just share a little bit
Cool.
about the backstory about that, that'd be really cool.
So I had a ME/CFS diagnosis actually. And so that basically what the my last year at Georgetown University, I got a really bad case of it was diagnosed as ME/CFS, except basically I was hardly diagnosed. I was mostly just sent to psychiatrist,
Hmm.
which was considered what I had like a lot of flu-like symptoms, pain. Like this is a very serious, it's a really serious condition, ME/CFS. And I had a really bad case. So basically, after just seeing, I don't know how many doctors who dismissed the case, unfortunately, I ended up seeking out a couple of people who looked at infection in the condition. That's because it just felt like, well, it started when I got sick with mono. Also, this was the
Okay.
last semester in college for me.
Uh
So I
huh.
basically got mono, and I just never recovered from it. And I continued to feel these like incredible flu-like symptoms. So I just started looking into the role of infection in diseases that were less studied, and that's how I kind of just began what I still am interested in,
And
which is
is
that.
if my memory is correct, didn't you lose a ton of weight during that time too?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a mix of like I was not in good shape. Yeah, I lost a ton of weight, and unfortunately, because and the weight was mostly lost because I was under such stress. Because what's difficult is like my doctors would tell me the condition was psychosomatic. And so at that point, it was recommended for me that I should exercise more, that I should like, try harder to,
Hmm.
basically, which was ridiculous. I was a great student. I was like top of my class, like had no problems with like my anything I was doing, like my pre-med stuff. I was pre-med at the time, right? And
Wow.
so all of a sudden, like the recommendations for me were actually exercise more. They actually wanted me to go to the gym every day. When in reality, what we really understand is a defining symptom of ME/CFS is that patients, it's called post-exertional malaise. You exercise and your body cannot recover from that. And that is one of the things. It's like extreme, it's a serious part of the condition. And so I would keep trying to exercise based off these recommendations from psychiatrists, and that
Right.
basically just took me down to a point where I was like, yeah, almost a skeleton from just the stress of it all.
Oh my gosh. And also probably the stress during that time being pre-med too, right?
No, see, that was totally fine.
Oh my God,
No,
really?
no problem with my classes, or I actually was like top of my class pre-med. I had no problems other than the fact that I had this case of mono and all of a sudden started to feel bad. Other than before that, I almost didn't know what stress was. I
Oh
thought
my
college was
gosh.
the best thing I've ever, I still do. My time at Georgetown was the best time ever. And I honestly didn't have any other issues. And so it's just like, it was very, that was almost what made it very clear to me that something beside, something was going on, in my opinion, related to infection, something out of my control for sure
So,
was what
so
I
when
said.
you looked at infection with yourself, did you know anything about Lyme, and did you look at tick bites, or did that come up at all for you?
No, like I didn't have, I mean, the symptoms I had were similar to what people with chronic Lyme disease have, but I never got that exact diagnosis. And honestly, like I couldn't tell you because I was never tested for Borrelia well.
Yeah.
It's just one of these things where I was looking for a doctor who would even listen to me, let alone someone that would, do testing that would be informative at this point. So I basically, I didn't, yeah, again, I had this ME/CFS, myalgic encephalomyelitis chronic fatigue syndrome diagnosis, and also a fibromyalgia diagnosis. And, those, I don't know, but to me, there were, when I started looking at patients with chronic Lyme disease, also, there was incredible overlap between, my symptoms, their symptoms, and symptoms of patients with related conditions.
Now, people with chronic fatigue, I'm sorry, not chronic fatigue, but fibromyalgia, are they always typically have like an overlap with chronic fatigue? Do you think?
It's common, yeah. It's a very common comorbidity.
I
Yeah,
bet.
and sometimes the yeah, it's a very common thing to have both conditions for sure.
Gosh, that must have been really challenging, right? Because you've just fatigued beyond your ability to handle, and then you're just sore and achy and just completely
Yeah.
feeling horrible all the time.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was eventually for 2 years totally bedridden from it, just totally. And when I mean bedridden, it's just no, did not leave my bed, like had to have people feed me, no light, no sound, nothing, nothing. I could not tolerate one thing in my environment anymore for two
That's
years.
that's so
I
crazy.
barely,
And
yeah.
And so what's weird is that, with a condition like that, I mean, doctors just don't know what to do with someone like you in that case. And, like we had a guy on our show just recently, Zirin, really cool guy. He used to live in Huntington Beach and now he just moved to Colorado. He's like a musician. And, his sort of fun is he has this like YouTube or YouTube cover band and he's like, he plays Bono, and so like he's out and performing but he got bit by a tick bite years ago, and he had one of the worst cases of Lyme disease that I've ever heard about. And when he was on the show, it kind of sounds similar to what you had going on. It's like it's a common thing, but the case that you have is so extreme that people aren't used to that.
Yeah, not really. Although if you start, looking around, there are so many patients right now who are bedridden with ME/CFS the way I was.
Hmm.
I speak to their families and parents every day.
Wow. And so from there, you started looking at infectious diseases, right? Or infections as a contributing cause to what was going on with you?
Yeah, definitely. Because again, like I said, I got sick after getting sick with mononucleosis. And I also, when I was a child, I have a twin sister, a fraternal twin sister. But we had a very similar environment, and did most of our stuff together in our
Okay.
lives. And she was totally healthy. So I was looking for factors that sort of differentiated us in a way. Why would I get this amazingly disabling condition and she was fine? And when we were young, another thing that happened is I had a very bad case of meningitis when I was 4.
Uh-huh.
And I almost died from that. I was brought back from that just enough. And then I had been vaccinated for measles, mumps, and rubella. But for whatever reason, I think maybe the meningitis reset my immune response. I'm not sure. And so the next year, I actually got measles, mumps, and rubella on 3 separate occasions and had to be hospitalized for each case.
And you
And
had been vaccinated for each one of those.
I have been vaccinated. I think there's studies now that show that meningitis can very much will actually just very much like screw up the immune response to in simple terms, right? So I do think that getting the meningitis after having been vaccinated may have rendered the immunity from the vaccines to not work as well. It's speculation though. I don't still have an answer today about why. I just ended up getting the illnesses despite being vaccinated, which is not very common. But I
Yeah.
got them. And so when I was looking back at this, I was like, well, okay, so I had all these very serious infectious conditions when I was younger. My twin sister didn't. I wonder if there could be something there. So I started looking back at the medical and scientific literature starting in basically the 1960s. And there were a lot of papers that, and even textbooks that showed that microbes, especially bacteria, can persist in latent forms that can actually be, dormant in a simple sense for a long period of time and reactivate later in life under conditions of what you name it, stress or other infections or anything like that, right? And so I became very interested in persistent infection as a driver of disease because I was curious about the fact that maybe the organisms that I acquired as a child that drove meningitis and measles and mumps, maybe they were still in my system in a way that our, I would say conventional medical testing is unable to detect, right? And
Hmm.
so there's just a huge, what I found is a huge body of literature on the fact that yes, there is a lot of evidence that a lot of these pathogens can persist inside the cells of the immune system and persist in latent or dormant forms that can cause disease at a later time. And that again, I'm not sure that that's what happened in my case, but again, it fed me into still becoming very interested in chronic infection, persistent infection in correlation with inflammatory conditions.
Now, with these bacteria and infections that are happening, do you think that there's a correlation to, like you said, maybe some kind of connection to the vaccines that you took and the antibiotics? And I don't know. I mean, this seems like there's got to be some kind of connection, right?
I don't know. I think I'm not sure if it has anything to do with the vaccines themselves or whether like I said, my guess is that the meningitis sort of reset the immunity that I might have gotten from the vaccines, but I don't know. Definitely, I do know that I was treated aggressively with immunosuppressive drugs and antibiotics for each condition, and that's expected because that's how we manage these conditions. But I don't know. Again, we definitely need more research. There are teams that are studying this, but we need more research on what happens when high dose antibiotics and steroids are used in patients with an infection, because there is a propensity for the use of those drugs to sometimes either foster the development of more persistent forms of the organism, or to further disable the immune response in a way that might allow the pathogen to better persist over time.
Hmm. So these pathogens we're exposed to in some weird way, just living our life in the environment, different places and things. And they're just in our body, sort of laying dormant all the time, you think?
No, well, see, then yeah, well, I'm talking there about what I would call dominant pathogens, which are some of the bigger players that we know are out there. So Epstein-Barr virus, the herpes viruses, cytomegalovirus, and tuberculosis. Those pathogens can definitely persist inside the cells of the immune system in latent forms that can cause disease at a later date.
Okay.
But where I went from there, from looking at these single pathogens and their ability to drive persistent chronic symptoms, was that I began to look at the earliest research on the human microbiome. And so this was around the year 2004. And in the year 2000, the human genome was sequenced about. So Craig Venter and the NIH kind of both did projects that sequenced the human genome, like our genetic code, right?
Hmm.
And then what happened after that is that research teams studying microbes and viruses, including those in the human body, began to take some of those computer based tools used to study the human genome
Hmm.
and turn those tools onto the study of microbes and viruses in the human body, because those computer tools allow those microbes to be detected based on their like DNA and RNA kind of gene signatures, right? So
Hmm.
it was a new way of being able to look for microbes in the human body. We could use computer tools instead of just trying to grow them in a lab, for example, right? And
Wow.
what that led to is that there these research teams that began to use those tools started to discover way more microbes and viruses, especially bacteria, because the earliest human microbiome studies were done on bacteria.
Okay.
And they began to discover that these areas of the body that we thought were sterile or had almost no organisms actually contained vastly more bacterial species than we knew about, and we had been missing them because we had not been using these computer tools that could detect them well.
Wow, that's fascinating. So when you say vastly more, is it the type of thing where we at that point discovered new pathogens and viruses and bacteria, or was it like we knew about these but we didn't know they were there, kind of a thing?
It's a mix. There are a lot of researchers in the 60s and 70s that did great work on organisms that could persist in human tissue and blood, and of course the gut. But these tools added a new level to that. And
Hmm.
so, yes, these early microbiome analysis that were computer based analyses began to detect species of bacteria in the human body that we never knew existed there before. And what we also realized was that these bacteria were persisting in ecosystems often, as in it's not just a single pathogen or microbe. There are communities of bacteria in most human tissue and blood at this point, to be honest, especially the gut. That's where most are located, which I think we're familiar with. But so humans are actually best defined as sort of superorganisms, or sometimes the word I use is a holobiont, which is we are organisms that have microbial ecosystems in us. And those microbes in those ecosystems play a tremendous role in both how we function in health and in disease.
And so, in your information that you sent to us a little bit before, I think yesterday or the day before, you were talking about, and I think I read a little bit of it, where most people are thinking about the gut and the microbiome in the gut, and everyone knows now. I mean, really, like as far as mainstream, this is only like 10 years old, where we're starting to
Yeah.
understand all of the stuff in the gut. But what you're saying is like, dude, it goes way beyond that, right? This microbiome and these infectious organisms don't just live in the gut; they live everywhere, right?
Mostly, yeah. And so basically, when it comes to where these microbes communities persist, we now understand that there's, for example, a lung microbiome. And by microbiome, I mean kind of microbial community, right? So there's
Okay.
microbial communities in the lungs.
Mm-hmm.
There's a bladder microbiome. The bladder was thought to be completely sterile, but it's actually full of organisms. There is a pancreas microbiome. The appendix has a microbiome. They're just we have so all these, and then there are definitely a good number of studies which show that even there are microbial communities in healthy blood, and there needs to be some more research done on that topic. But there is enough evidence, that early evidence, that indicates that healthy people probably also harbor microbes in their blood as well. And right now, for example, researchers at Harvard are starting what's called the Brain Microbiome Project, which is early research that's looking at the fact that our brains appear to also harbor their own microbial communities.
That's
So
so
basically,
crazy.
yeah, we are
Oh, sorry, you cut out.
full of my. Oh, okay,
Yeah,
we
sorry
are
about that. For the past like 10 seconds, you cut out there.
okay. Yeah, well, we are just full of microbes, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's amazing too when you think about all this because most of the time people are just focusing on the gut and nowhere else. But so when you say, so what fascinates me is that there are different bacteria and microbes and fungus and yeast, and so are all of these different items living sort of in congruence with one another and fighting and competing with one another?
That's a good point. They live together. So sometimes I'll use a forest as an example. Let's say the rainforest. It's sort of like that. These are ecosystems that could be similar to the rainforest. You have just different organisms persisting together. It's not necessarily always competitive, but they all interact with each other. And there's these relationships. One microbe might compete with another. One microbe might benefit from, a metabolite or produced by another microbe. I mean, it's there's it's just it's an ecosystem like any other ecosystem on the planet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, I want to add is that in the last couple years, just we like I said, most of the early human microbiome studies looked at bacterial populations in these different parts of the human body. But now, in the last couple of years, we've looked a lot more at viruses in the human body. So that is actually now referred to these viral communities that persist with our bacterial communities and our fungal communities. But if you want to just refer to the viruses, it's called the human virome. In the human virome, the viruses in the human body are even more extensive than the bacteria in the human body. And so we're just at this early stage where we're realizing that probably at this point in time, only 1 to 2% of viruses that persist in humans have been even identified and studied.
That is
So we have
so crazy.
viruses, yeah. And a lot of the viruses are what are called bacteriophages, which are viruses that infect bacteria and modulate their activity. So you can just really see how there's like layers in these ecosystems. You have bacteria, you have viruses that infect the bacteria, you have bacteria interacting with fungi, you actually have viruses that can infect fungi called mycoviruses. There's just a whole range of different organisms that are all part of these communities that are inside our bodies.
That is so, gosh, it goes so much deeper than I ever thought. So when you're
Yeah.
talking about like an area of the body, like a microbiome of, say, like a liver or a pancreas or whatever, different areas, um, we know that they sort of exist, right? Like we're just finding out, your research is showing that they exist. Now, the question in my mind is whatever is there is like, how do we know that that's what's supposed to be there? Or do we even know that?
Good question.
Yeah.
We don't know. What we can mostly do is we'll take people who are healthy, right? Who just don't seem to, don't have any diagnoses, who are able, especially let's say someone like an athlete, functioning well. Now, take an Olympic athlete functioning at the peak of their career. They have a microbiome, virome ecosystems in them, right? So we have to assume that in those people, those microbes and viruses are acting in a way that is conducive, they're in a state of balance that is actually allowing that person to function well, right? And so we can look at what like microbiome populations are like in patients and people who are healthy like that. And then what a lot of teams do is take patients with different chronic inflammatory conditions or different diseases, and they will look at the composition of the microbiome in patients with those conditions. And in a lot of cases, what they find is that yes, these microbe and virus and fungal ecosystems have shifted away from a state similar to what healthy people often harbor. And that is referred to as microbiome dysbiosis, sort
Hmm.
of an imbalance of these communities that can contribute to chronic inflammation and chronic disease symptoms.
Yeah, I'd imagine that a lot of this for people would be different throughout the different courses of their life, different stress levels, different environments. You go traveling, you're around different people, and I imagine that a lot of this stuff is always in a kind of like an ebb and flow and in flux, basically. Um,
Yeah.
but what's so fascinating to me is like how a virus can infect a bacteria and sort of overtake the bacteria and
Yeah.
control that. And so, why would a virus do that? And what would it be trying to do that a bacteria? It almost seems like a virus has a consciousness and it needs to infect a bacteria in order to carry out a certain task, right?
It doesn't have a consciousness. At
It
least
seems like
hasn't
it.
shown up yet, because
Yeah.
who knows, right? But like at this point, no. The main thing is that if you would just compare it to, let's say again, the rainforest, you'd say, why do bears eat fish, or why do monkeys eat, other animals? It's just a terrible analogy, right? Or why are these bears killing deer, right?
Uh huh.
It's just part of what's evolved to happen, right? So there's just these are different organisms and they have these different capabilities, and that's what happens when they live in an ecosystem together.
Mm-hmm.
And isn't necessarily a purpose at all on the point of the viruses in infecting bacteria. It's just that they exist in these communities and they do that as part of their lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
And that results in the eventual dynamics of the community that we have. And I think, again, under conditions of health and balance, that infection, this viruses infecting bacteria, which are called bacteriophages, is a normal occurrence, just like any animal in another ecosystem, would eat another animal, or that, that's normal. The problem is, under conditions of inflammation, or like you said, stress or different problems, do those relationships go out of whack? Essentially, that's
Mm-hmm.
what we're looking at.
Yeah, it's interesting. So when you said, because you're on the cutting edge of all this kind of microbiome stuff, and so when you said earlier about, we talked about fungus, yeast, bacteria, viruses, all these things, and you said of the viruses we only know about 1 to 2% of them. When it comes to all of this stuff, like the microbiome and the human body, how much do you think in your research do we actually know of how the body itself as a whole even works? It sounds to me like we're just barely scratching the surface, you know?
We're always just scratching the surface in science. I think like every generation of scientists, is gets, I know from we're going to move on, and people will look back at this time period as, that we probably knew nothing, right?
Yeah.
But we knew some stuff. And what I would say is like, okay, what we do definitely know is that these microbes and their metabolites interact with our human pathways and our human genetic and metabolic pathways. And that is an important, probably the most fundamental thing about them, in my opinion, is that the microbes we harbor and the viruses we harbor, and the fact that they create kind of proteins and metabolites as part of their lifestyles in our body. Those microbes or these proteins and metabolites can directly alter the expression of human genetic pathways and human metabolic pathways.
Oh,
So we
that's
can
the
see
crux right there,
we
right?
microbes that actually modulate how our human genes function and how our metabolic pathways function. And so you can see just in that very mechanism how a lot of these organisms could drive disease. Because if a pathogen is part of these, if these communities, if these microbiome ecosystems in us evolve to harbor more pathogens, and pathogens that are acting more virulently, or like more in a more pathogenic state,
Mm-hmm.
they do begin to modulate human gene expression and human metabolism. And that is a major driver of human disease.
I mean, that statement itself is like a lifetime of study, right? It's just understanding that these things can modulate, the actual expression of our own genes. So explain to me a little bit like how this happens. So a metabolite gets produced by a virus, and then that metabolite somehow interacts with the genetic code, our DNA, and then the cells replicate in a different way. Like, explain a little bit how all that works.
Yeah. So simple. I'll give you an example. There's a receptor that's important in controlling the human immune response. It's called the VDR nuclear receptor. And this is a receptor that I started studying early on in my career. And
Okay.
so picture the receptor as like, let's say you're going down a hallway, right? And there are different doors, and they're sort of like each door has a lock. And like you have to get through, you kind of have to put the right key in the lock to move forward. Well, that could be sort of like what a human signaling pathway is like when it comes to sort of signals the immune system to work the way it should. You have these checkpoints that have receptors on them, and if the right human sort of protein binds into that receptor, it's kind of like a lock and key thing, and the pathway moves forward correctly. Well, when we started studying this receptor, the VDR nuclear receptor, what we realized is that Epstein-Barr virus could actually, uh, you know, create proteins or join into
Oh, sorry, Amy. You
modulate.
sorry, Amy, to cut you off, but you cut out for about 10 seconds there. The vmix
Oh,
video
right,
got cut off there. So go back about 10 seconds
okay.
if you could. Yeah.
Right. So we were looking at this VDR nuclear receptor, right?
Mm-hmm.
That controls, under its control, are these important parts of the immune response that function to keep the immune system active and in good shape. And what we started realizing is many well-known pathogens either create proteins or metabolites that can bind into this receptor, sort of like a lock and key, and those microbial metabolites or proteins can change activity of that important receptor in a way that favors their survival. So essentially, this receptor, the VDR, is very important for the human immune response to function correctly. And there are a different number of microbes: Epstein-Barr virus, Borrelia, cytomegalovirus, HIV, different fungal species that all either directly modulate activity of that receptor or create proteins that modulate that activity of the receptor so that it slows its activity and the immune system no longer functions as well in that person.
So
So
it
you,
you so it
yeah,
it alters the receptor so that it can essentially carry out what it's trying to do. And so it does
yeah.
this throughout the entire body, or at least tries to.
Yes. Well, yeah, these receptors are in different different cells of the human body. This is just an example.
Okay.
So, and it's just it's a logical survival mechanism for these pathogens. If you think about it, if there's a receptor that plays an important role in keeping the immune response active and in good shape in a person, and you as a microbe can sort of knock down the ability of that receptor to function correctly, well, you're going to survive in the body in a much easier fashion, right? So basically, that's part of the trend where a lot of pathogens, chronic pathogens, knock down parts of the human immune response in order to better persist and survive.
So
And then,
where are we getting these pathogens to begin with? How are they being
right.
introduced into our body, I wonder, these viruses and things? It's interesting to think about, how they first get introduced and then what your body does with them at that point. Like, how do they first come in, do you think?
Let me answer. Let me get my charger for 1 second.
Oh yeah, 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 no worries. So my goodness. So what do you guys think about this? I mean, this to me is so fascinating, all of this stuff, because like the work that she's doing is just basically showing us that we know very little about what's actually going on. And when you consider the immune system and the microbiome doesn't just live in the gut, like how fascinating is it that we have these different communities and and how they all interact with each other and then with themselves too. Like you have different viruses interacting with themselves and each other and different funguses. And I mean, the amount of different interactions that can happen is just got to be unbelievable, staggering, right?
It's pretty much almost, I don't know what word you would use, almost semi-infinite. There are
Uh-huh.
so many organisms in the human body, and there's so many possible ways that they interact that it's almost impossible to even use algorithms to figure it out.
So, Amy, I'm curious, like when you're talking
Mhm.
about, let's say, Epstein-Barr, let's say in your example, because this just fascinates me to no end. So, if Epstein-Barr is trying to sort of modulate or somehow control the receptors, specific receptors on specific cells to carry out its job, I kind of think of it like an example similar to like, let's say two guys are trying to get knocked down the same door for different reasons. So if you have like a different set of viruses that are trying to alter those same receptors, I'm sure that's happening too. So what's up with that?
That's a really important part of some of the models I've put forward and published on for the development of chronic inflammatory disease is that in a lot of conditions, even autoimmune conditions, let's say MS, lupus, ME/CFS, you name it, rheumatoid arthritis, we will see that patients often harbor higher titers, if you want to call it, or levels of viruses like Epstein-Barr. And so in these conditions, we've looked for single pathogens for a long time. Like there have been research teams that have said, like, maybe we can find Epstein-Barr virus in every patient with MS, right? Because it's detected more commonly in those patients. But then that's never worked out because we've never found one single virus in every patient with a chronic condition like MS. And one of the reasons for that may be that different pathogens can dysregulate the same human pathway or similarly dysregulate. So you might have one person might harbor Epstein-Barr virus, right? And that might affect a pathway that knocks down the immune response. But another person might have Borrelia, and that could knock down the same pathway and affect the immune response in a similar fashion. And another person could have a fungus like Aspergillus, and
Hmm.
that fungus could knock down that same pathway. And so you can see that what that means is that not every patient with the same diagnosis necessarily has to harbor the exact same pathogen or mix of pathogens to be suffering from similar dysregulation driven by infectious agents.
My goodness. And then are there different funguses of all the different of all the funguses that there are there different funguses that compete with each other for that same pathway? I guess we don't know then.
Yeah, I mean, we found about, 8 organisms that could affect the same pathway, right? But that's just us doing basic research. If
Yeah.
more teams got involved, and started looking at other organisms, I suspect we would find that less well-studied pathogens also affect the same pathway. That's one of the things right now is there are so many more bacteria, viruses, and fungi in the body than we ever expected to be there. So our study of most of them is just either we've not studied certain species yet, or we're just learning that they're there. So most research on chronic inflammatory disease focuses on those pathogens that we know have known longer, Epstein-Barr virus and Borrelia, which is normal. But now we have to add in the fact that there are a lot of other pathogens that can also be contributing to these disease states in concert with those other ones. So
S-
yeah, we kind of like reached a new level.
Yeah. So how do these bacteria or different microbiomes is if you're looking at different microbiomes of different organisms, or I'm sorry, not different organisms, but different organs, is it kind of similar to like how you have one high school basketball team competing against another high school basketball team from, across the state? Do entire microbiomes compete with one another, do you think?
No, I not really. No, I would say, you know, sometimes to me, we break up these microbiomes. We'll say the lung microbiome and the bladder microbiome and the gut microbiome.
Uh-huh.
The more I read, the more that a lot of these ecosystems actually seem more interconnected. I think we're moving towards a place where we're just going to more understand that most human tissue and blood harbors microbial and viral ecosystems, and they're not necessarily they're one there's going to be different communities and different sites, but they're not competing with each other. They're all basically part of this same ecosystem. The larger question is, do they start to compete with not compete do they start to interact with us in a way that can be essentially competitive, in that if pathogens begin to dominate these ecosystems, then like I said, they're going to push our human genetic and metabolic pathways into a state that could cause disease. So there's more, in a way, competition between the microbiome and us, in a way, as opposed
Mm-hmm.
to the microbiomes in different body sites.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So with these different communities and different microbiomes, what would be the upside for a certain microbiome to dysregulate enough and just cause so much issues with someone's like say liver, and then someone dies of liver disease. Like, what's the overall upside for the microbiome there? Because then their host dies, right?
That's a good point, and that's a very good point. Yeah, that's in some ways why I think we are basically living in an epidemic. We are living in an epidemic of chronic disease right now. The incidence of every chronic inflammatory condition is on the rise. I mean, for example, someone gets diagnosed with Alzheimer's every 66 seconds in the United States. We see cases of these conditions in younger and younger people. And part of that is because these pathogens don't kill their host, they persist and they drive chronic symptoms. And we have not been very good at studying that for a long time. We focused on the way that they affect us. Let's say we study a lot of Epstein Barr and the way it acts in someone with mono, but we haven't done, or the general research community has not been as interested in Epstein-Barr as a driver of chronic disease. And that's not saying there are not teams doing that.
Uh-huh.
There needs to be on that. The whole point is they don't kill you, but they can cause a lot of debilitating chronic symptoms.
I was listening to a doctor a while back, Dr. Lee Cowden, and he was doing some research on electromagnetic fields, and wireless technology and 5G and stuff like. And dirty electricity. There's been studies showing connection between insulin levels and the body's ability to regulate the sugar levels and things like that, from the dirty electricity in the walls. And what this guy was saying was he was doing some studies with fungus and how their ability to replicate inside of a Faraday cage and outside of a Faraday cage, directly exposed to wireless radiation. And what they showed was there was a 600 times more replication when the fungus was exposed to dirty electricity or like EMF kind of a stuff. And I'm curious, like,
Yep.
how does all this stuff, environmental changes, affect these, systems in our body, do you think?
Yeah, okay, that's a big point, and that's a fascinating study, by the way. I'm really interested in that. I'm probably going to contact him after this.
Yeah, definitely,
um,
definitely.
yeah. Um, well, okay, yes. I want to make clear that in a person in a state of health, we don't necessarily have to be overly concerned about the microbiome. If you're out there right now and you're functioning well, your microbes are in a state, like I said, it's like a rainforest that's, doing, its thing, right?
Right.
That there's balance in this. So I'm not trying to imply that the microbiome is always sort of a problem. It's actually just part of who we are in a way in health, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in disease, yes, the microbiome can shift again towards a state of dysbiosis. And in under that conditions of imbalance or dysbiosis, pathogens can begin to drive chronic symptoms or drive problems with human gene expression and metabolism, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yes, why? So then you would say, well, why does that happen in some people and not in others? And there are definitely many parts of what I would call modern living that can contribute to our microbiome ecosystems moving away from a state of balance. And yes, that would be, for example, in my opinion, immunosuppressive drugs, for one thing. We have basically most of the pharmaceutical industry focuses on drugs that shut down the human immune system in patients with autoimmune disease. And that's been based on the classical theory of autoimmunity, which postulates that the immune system in autoimmune disease somehow fails and turns against self, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if our immune systems begin to attack our own bodies for reasons that remain unclear. That's sort of the classical model of autoimmunity, right?
Right,
And
right.
so we've developed the top selling drugs in the world are immunosuppressive drugs that we use to essentially knock down the immune system in patients with those conditions. And it does lead to symptom relief, because by knocking down the immune response, you knock down inflammation that's associated with the disease. So and for patients taking these medications, I'm not trying to say that that's something you shouldn't do. That's the main treatment option available in 2018 for these conditions. And it's totally normal to be on these drugs. But one of the things that I look at often, and that I just published a recent paper on, is the fact that the theory of autoimmunity needs to be reevaluated to account for the fact that we now understand that our human bodies are filled with microbial and viral ecosystems. Because now that we understand that, it is much more likely that in patients with autoimmune disease, the immune system is not attacking itself. It is acting up against certain pathogens that persist in these microbiome communities. And
Mm.
in that case, that means that the root cause of many of these autoimmune conditions may actually be persistent pathogens. If that's the case, then knocking down the immune response with immunosuppressive drugs is a terrible direction for long-term treatment. We are slowing the ability of the immune response to deal with the root cause of the condition, the infection.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is one of the ways that I think that we are actually, unfortunately, exacerbating the incidence of these conditions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Beyond that,
no,
though,
no,
yeah,
that's fascinating stuff. I hope you guys are enjoying this show with Amy Proal. Her website is microbeminded.com. And let me just bring it up for you guys if you guys want to check it out, microbeminded.com. And when we come back from the break, I think I want to dive into this whole autoimmune issue, because she's been doing a lot of work with it. And this is where I originally found her work, talking about Lyme disease and knocking down the immune system and autoimmune diseases and things like that. So her website, again, is microbeminded.com. This is episode 635. I hope you guys are enjoying the show in the chat room. When we come back from the break, I will I will, go through the chat room and see if there's any good questions there for you. But I wanted to tell you guys about this Juve red light therapy. Have you guys checked this thing out yet? Really an awesome piece of equipment. And when you start looking into the work of the neurosurgeon, Dr. Jack Kruse, you start looking at mitochondrial health and how the mitochondria impacts genetic expression. And he goes into all of this deep, deep science with how light affects our biology and what it does to the mitochondria, and it allows the mitochondria to work and function properly and create ATP. And here's a little picture of me standing in front of mine. And I got my little sauna in the background. And, sometimes I'll do this and then I'll go in the sauna and then I'll jump on the rebounder. And it's just a lot of cool things to help take care of your health. The Juve red light therapy is awesome. It is amazing, amazing piece of equipment. It helps with your mitochondria, like I said, but it also helps to stimulate DNA and RNA. And it activates the lymphatic system, increases blood flow. And it's really tremendous for carrying waste out of the body and, repairing damaged tissue. Some of the more, I guess, what's the right word? Some of the more, I guess, physical benefits are, it helps to repair sun or acne damaged skin. It's really great for your skin. Helps to increase collagen production in the cells. So standing in front of it, with your face is tremendous. Red light therapy is just incredible. If you look in PubMed for photobiomodulation, or I think it's LLLT, low level laser therapy, I think they call it on PubMed. But it does so many different things specifically to your mitochondria, but it also helps with muscle recovery, peak performance. It's great for scars and wrinkles, stretch marks, wound healing, anti-aging, reduces joint inflammation, and so many great studies going on about this. Let me read one here. A study of obesity surgery research red light therapy for body contouring. This 2011 double-blind randomized study performed light therapy at 635 to 680 nanometers, which is exactly what the Juve is, on participants for 4 weeks and recorded effects on the waistline. At the end of the study, participants had achieved a statistically significant reduction in waistline girth. And so I'm not really into it for that. I'm more into it for mitochondrial health. But the Juve is cool. They have all these different modular designs. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see this guy here. I think he's a UFC athlete, but you can put them all around you in different areas, and you can actually get them for your desk as well. And so you can put one right on your desk. I'm just a big fan of using red light therapy to help your body and your mitochondria heal. So if you guys are interested in the Juve red light therapy, it's a great device to have at your home. And what I like to do is turn my home into like a little spa, have the sauna, have the rebounder, the Juve red light therapy device. It's really, really cool. So I highly recommend it if you guys are interested in utilizing more light and light frequencies, biophotons or photons, to impact your mitochondria. And then the other thing I want to tell you guys about, speaking of digestion and microbiome and stuff like this, this Stockton Aloe 1, if you go to your health food store and you look at all the sort of aloe vera ingredients, you'll find so many bizarre ingredients in your aloe vera. And Stockton Aloe 1 is the only one that I've been able to find that is it's fresh frozen, it's raw, and it's incredible. And aloe vera has been used for thousands of years all around the world to help improve our microbiome, to help improve our gut health, to soothe inflammation. It's the original superfood. And what's cool about it is that there's 75 different active compounds, vitamins, minerals, enzymes, amino acids, unique sugars like polysaccharides and lignans and things like that. But what's cool about it too is it has something called ace-mannan, which is it actually helps to induce macrophages in the body to produce interferon and tumor necrosis factor A. This is all like aloe vera, nature's first superfood. So ideally, the best thing to do would be get aloe vera fresh and just grow it. But that's challenging, right? And so it's good to always kind of have a backup plan. And, taking aloe vera every day would be incredible for your digestive health, for your overall body health, for your energy. It's like I said, it's the original superfood before all this superfood craze started happening. So consider getting some Stockton Aloe 1. They'll send you some face cream along with it. And I think there might even be a Black Friday deal going on. I'm not sure if it's still going on. If you guys are watching on YouTube, there should be a link to our Black Friday page. It covers through I think, Cyber Monday too. So you may want to check the description of that, and you can learn more about Stockton Aloe-1 and see if they are still running a little deal on the Stockton Aloe-1 there for you. So so getting back to Amy Proal, I'm really curious, Amy, getting back to all of what you're talking about, this idea of autoimmunity. And, in the natural world, we think that there is such a thing as autoimmune diseases. But if what you're showing is accurate, man, talk about a complete game changer, right?
It's a total game changer. Yes, because the theory of autoimmunity is based on the assumption that the body is sterile, right? So
Uh-huh.
what happened is, back in whatever the 40s, 50s, we started to identify. We realized that that pathogens, antibodies are created in response to a pathogen, right?
Okay.
So take like the flu, right? When we get sick with influenza, our body begins to create antibodies against the influenza virus, and that's part of the immune response towards the virus that eventually helps us hopefully recover from the infection, right? So what happened is that research teams at the same time began to detect antibodies in patients with chronic conditions like multiple sclerosis or lupus or rheumatoid arthritis. But since the human body was believed to be totally sterile, except for some bacteria in the gut, they didn't think they could correlate those antibodies with the presence of any pathogen. So they developed the theory of autoimmunity, which contends that these so called autoantibodies are just created in response to self. Like, when in reality, now that we're beginning to study the microbiome environment much more, we see increasing evidence that what we call autoantibodies are actually normal antibodies created in response to microbiome pathogens. Sometimes those antibodies can cross react with human tissue and impact human tissue, but the original reason that the autoantibody, so-called autoantibody, is created is because it's created in response to a persistent pathogen. And there are just in a growing body of studies, excellent research showing that that seems to be the case. And of
So,
course,
oh,
go
no,
ahead.
no, go. No, please go ahead.
Well, that means for treatment for these conditions that we would want to go in the other direction. We would not want to shut down the immune system in patients with these conditions. We would actually want to better support or stimulate the immune system to better target pathogens that could be at the root cause of the condition.
So the issue is with a lot of people is typically how they feel and the duration of time um, shortly thereafter when they take something for a chronic autoimmune condition. So I guess what I'm saying is that the reason why this autoimmune thing is going is because there are medications people can take, right, that
Yeah.
immediately make them feel better. But what you're
Yeah.
saying is that the long term, you're not really fixing the real issue, which could be something completely different, right?
Exactly. And again, I don't, no shame for patients on these medicines, but what I think happens is that yes, if you basically if the antibodies and autoimmunity are created in response to a pathogen, what happens is that if you use an immunosuppressive drug, for example, like Humira, it'll knock down T cell activity and a large part of the immune response. And what that means is the immune system actually becomes debilitated and will no longer target the pathogen that could be driving the symptoms as much. That means that there's actually going to be a reduction in inflammation and symptoms, right? But that doesn't mean that, unfortunately, the pathogen that's at the root of it is going to be able to survive and persist in a better place. So, long term, you might not end up in as good shape, right? And we do see that patients on these immunosuppressive drugs don't do well over time. Often they need higher doses of the immunosuppressive drugs over time. Often they come back to their physician, and after a couple of years, they have a second autoimmune or inflammatory diagnosis, or a third, to the point where I think at this point, we have, there are patients with up to 5 comorbidities that taking these medications, and we're seeing trends where it does not seem to be actually it's helping patients manage symptoms but not get to the root cause of the condition.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of like when you have the flu, okay, and you take a Motrin, right? If you take Motrin, you know that it temporarily, what Motrin does is it's also an anti-inflammatory. It will knock down some of the inflammation associated with the battle between your immune system and the flu virus. and you'll feel better. But no one thinks a Motrin is actually curing the virus. You see what I mean?
Hmm.
That's similar to what's happening with these immunosuppressive drugs.
Yeah, and so I guess it all depends on the stage in someone's life that they're at. Like if they're 30 years old and they really want to get to the root cause versus if they're 85 years old and they just want to manage symptoms, right?
Definitely, yes. It's a totally reasonable choice. If you want to manage symptoms and you take an immunosuppressive drug, that's just a completely logical decision. But what I like to look at is the future, how we can improve treatments for I'm going to say even the next generation of patients, if it comes to that, right?
Hmm.
And what would be really interesting and really cool is if, as soon as patients develop the symptoms of an chronic inflammatory condition, an autoimmune condition, or even a neurodegenerative condition, if we actually decided to support the immune system at that point in time, instead of knocking it down, could we better change the trajectory of their disease over the long term? Right.
The question,
And
though, Amy, is that if you support the immune system, a short-term side effect of that would be even feeling worse, right?
exactly. That's
Yeah.
where it gets and sometimes confusing and complicated is that if you support the immune system to better target a persistent pathogen, it often results in what's called a Herxheimer reaction. And I think many patients, especially Lyme patients, are familiar with a Herxheimer reaction, right? Because as the immune system better tries to target the pathogen that could be at the root cause of the condition, there's essentially a battle begins between the immune system and the pathogen, and inflammatory molecules are secreted. And if it's a there's more dead immune cells and debris that accumulates in the bloodstream, and the body has to deal with that as the infection is killed, right? So that's a Herxheimer response in a way. So yes, patients who stimulate their immune systems to better target a pathogen might have to deal with Herxheimer, or what I sometimes call immunopathology. Again, though, what I see as being key to that is that I've worked with a couple immunostimulatory treatments that do that in patients with autoimmune disease.
Hmm.
And again, if you start an immunostimulative treatment early on, before symptoms get too bad, before the earliest sign of symptoms, the Herxheimer is often not that bad, and it's actually fairly easy. Not easy, but patients can manage it, and they often get to a state where they feel a lot better. The big problem we have is people who have been sick for decades and they've been given, immunosuppressive drugs for 20 years. And trying to then stimulate the immune system in those cases is going to generate a lot of Herxheimer, and it's very
Hmm.
difficult to turn that
Yeah.
around.
Yeah. I can understand
So,
that.
yeah,
So,
I'm a
with
huge
regards to
advocate
like, sorry about
for
that.
preventative. Yeah. I'm a huge advocate for preventative, almost predictive and preventative treatments for these conditions. Intervention immediately, as soon as the first symptom is noted, to support the immune system.
Yeah, interesting, interesting. So when it comes to something that we all know about, like arthritis, like maybe rheumatoid arthritis is classically known as like an autoimmune disease.
Yeah.
What do you think is happening there? Do you think?
So I think what happens is that there may be okay, in whether it's sometimes even just in the gut or in different areas of the body, or perhaps even in the joint synovial fluid, there may be a pathogen or a community that has like kind of moved towards a state that better enhances the survival of pathogens, and the immune system recognizes that and begins to target those chronic pathogens that may be impacting people with the condition. And so that results in symptoms and inflammation, and also in the production of what may now be called autoantibodies. And what can sometimes happen is that when an antibody is created in response to a persistent pathogen that could be contributing to the condition, there's similarity in size and shape between let's see. Okay, it's something called molecular mimicry, which is the fact that our human tissues are often have proteins or sequences associated with them that are similar to genetic sequences associated with a pathogen. So an antibody that's originally directed against a pathogen may also incorrectly harbor target human tissue that has a genetic sequence that's similar to that of the pathogen. It's sort of like a mix up in the target.
Yeah, interesting. Okay.
And that's called molecular mimicry.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So somehow the body's getting confused? And is it because it's not smart enough, or the actual pathogens are so smart that they're outsmarting the body? Oh no.
If there's an infection it's trying to target it correctly. It's a normal immune response. It's just that sometimes the immune system will end up targeting human tissue because of this sort of similarity between the pathogen genetic peptides, or the way a pathogen sort of protein looks and a human protein. It can get confused.
Uh-huh.
Or a human molecule. But that confusion is actually a very kind of not small part of it. The original sort of response to a pathogen is normal.
Yeah, so let me think if I understand this correctly. Yeah, yeah.
Tries to explain that a little bit better
Okay.
on my blog.
So
If you look
so
there,
you said you did write one, or is it?
yeah, it's on there.
Okay,
Um,
let me bring it up so I can maybe you can direct me to where it is. Let me bring it up on your website so people can, because
yeah,
that itself is pretty fascinating. So it'll be on the site here pretty soon. Okay, so now if you guys are watching on the YouTube video, we're on microbeminded.com, and so direct me where to go about more about that.
so yeah, I'm pulling it up. I think it's like if you go to under um, let's see, under a recent post.
Okay.
My phone's on. Okay. Yeah, go to rethinking this one. Rethinking higher up. Sorry. Yeah,
Okay.
that one. So, if you're interested, I really worked on trying to simplify it in the best terms that I could, and you can hear me talking about it, what I'm explaining, and you can read the text of what I'm saying. So it kind of goes into what I was talking about, sort of the history of how we began to associate autoantibodies with self, and then how we began to have to incorporate the microbiome into everything, and then just sort of like the difference between targeting a root cause and targeting just palliation with symptoms.
Well, you know what's crazy too is that, like, we haven't really talked about how, I mean, we talked about the microbiome, but I wonder how the microbiome, like, we all know the microbiome gets affected obviously by antibiotics, but what about just regular drugs, like you mentioned Humira, things like that? Like, what
Yeah.
is going on with the biome in relationship to that,
There's not as many studies as I would like to see on that, just because this is a changing paradigm where, this is a paradigm shift. If the root of autoimmune disease ends up being persistent infection, then that is a major paradigm shift, right? And so we are still sort of at that point right now where we're science is figuring out which model they're going to move forward, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, unfortunately, what that means is that in patients who are given a lot of immunosuppressive drugs, there's not a lot of teams who are studying the effects of those immunosuppressive drugs on the microbiome. And I think that would be that is a very important area of research that we should start doing.
Mm-hmm.
But when I've looked at the topic, I have, for example, looked at studies in patients who, for example, were organ transplant recipients, and organ transplants recipients have to be take immunosuppressive drugs, quite a few sometimes, so that they don't reject the organ that they were given, which is
Mm-hmm.
in that case, they must do that. That is how you, proceed, right? And in those cases, there have been some studies on the microbiome in patients with taking immunosuppressive drugs for that situation. And there are cases in which you can see the microbiome move away more away from a state of balance in patients on the immunosuppressive drugs.
Mm-hmm. And I'm just curious for my own benefit to know this. And I know we've covered this, but I know that when I listen to podcasts, sometimes I'm doing something, and I'm walking around or I'm working out or something, and you kind of your mind kind of wanders a little bit. But just for my own benefit, I want to sort of revisit what might be going on with autoimmune diseases. So what you're saying, and let me see if I get this even close to correct, is that we have this entire massive ecosystem filled with viruses, bacteria, fungus, mold, yeast, and all these different microbes inside of our bodies. And the classical autoimmune issues that's sort of known about in both conventional and non-conventional disciplines is that our bodies attack itself. And we don't know why, but here are some medications to help with the symptoms of that. But with this model that you're talking about, is that there are at least the presence of, or the combination or the interaction between these types of microbes and organisms that live inside of our body somehow um, breaking down the tissues because they're misunderstanding different areas of the body. This is where I fail to understand.
Yeah, it's pretty close. You know what? To be fair, the basics of what I think is happening is that yeah, there are certain pathogens that are part of these microbiome ecosystems in the human body, and depending on how that pathogen's acting in a certain patient, the immune system will target that pathogen, and that accounts for the inflammation and symptoms of autoimmune disease. That's really the main part of it, is that the immune system is not targeting itself. It is actually responding correctly to persistent pathogens that may be at the heart of these conditions.
And why would the immune system do that to itself? I mean, it doesn't make any sense, right?
It never has made sense to me. It just doesn't, there are even evolutionary biologists who have argued that it doesn't even make sense from a perspective of basic evolution, in that we can see the incidence, like I said, of most of these chronic inflammatory and autoimmune conditions going up and up. More patients are getting sick with these conditions each year, essentially. If this were a disease in which the immune system fails and turns against itself, those patients would be weeded from the population. Like, you would see that how would I say, patients who were more likely to suffer from a severe autoimmune condition in which the immune system turns against itself somehow would be less likely to reproduce. That's just the way evolution works. And you
Mm-hmm.
would expect to see less of that propensity for this self attack of the immune system to be passed to the next generation, right? So what you would expect is that if it were due to attack against self, the incidence of these diseases should be going down over time.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that the incidence of these diseases is going up over time, almost by definition, suggests that something related to the environment has to be involved in these conditions.
But
It
couldn't
just doesn't support a model in which this just attack against self is being passed from generation to generation. Something else has to be involved, because otherwise you wouldn't see such a rise in the incidence and severity of these conditions over time.
Are we seeing a rise in actual causes or a percentage based rise? Because you can, put
Yeah.
in their population control or population, to account for that, right?
You mean like what are we seeing a rise in? What I mean when I talk about rise is like just more patients are getting diagnosed with these conditions than ever before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I was
So,
saying, that like, population is increasing all the time, and that could account for that, or do you think no,
yeah. Mm,
not really?
yeah, that could play into it a little bit, but no, I think generally speaking, it is more correlated with the fact that even in communities that we have been studying, that have not necessarily expanded more, we still see incidents going up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fascinating stuff. So, is it safe to say that in the autoimmune model, because we know that all of this stuff that we've been talking about today, whether it's natural or approach or medical approach, all of it is tied in some weird way to this economic system we live in. And is it possible that there is as much of an economic benefit from going to the non-autoimmune model like you're talking about? Like, is there enough profit for them to make drugs or even natural remedies? Is that
Yeah.
a viable direction to go from a monetary perspective, you think?
I don't know. I don't think that there's been any kind of actual conspiracy in any of this. I
Hmm.
think that what has happened is that there were a number of consensus conferences over time in which the scientific community was generally really genuinely kind of trying to come to a consensus on what doctors should tell patients was happening with them in autoimmune disease. And the autoimmune model kind of won out in the 1970s. It was like, look, like this is like where patients want an explanation for their symptoms, and this seems what's most likely to be happening now, and they move forward with that. I don't think that there was any sort of malintent to sort of say, hey, let's hide the truth or anything, right?
Right.
But unfortunately, since that was the model that moved forward, and became the widely accepted model that began to be, described in textbooks and in every medical course, the pharmaceutical industry followed that model, and began to develop, now what are the top selling drugs in the world? These potent immunosuppressive drugs that destroy the immune response to a great extent, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so the question is now, now that they have become the top selling drugs in the world, will that make it harder if we now have new knowledge, which means that we could have essentially there could in thinking about the root of the microbiome imbalance and persistent infection. If that's the case, it might take a little longer to change that because the pharmaceutical industry is doing very well with their current immunosuppressive drugs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes
Like
total
I
sense.
can't, it's it's I don't I just mean like it's unlikely that a company is going to just drop their $1 billion a year profit
Right.
until until at least it's going to have to be like a very very big shift in thinking before that happens. But meanwhile, and that's what I find interesting about this radio show that we're doing. You can see that there are people constantly who are doing treatments that don't have anything to do with autoimmunity, that are helping patients with autoimmune disease. And like, so there are plenty of things that are being done and plenty of treatments out there that are being tested, that already sort of support chronic infection as a driver of autoimmunity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether those can sort of gain more mainstream acceptance, I don't know. One of the problems is that in these conditions, the nature of the microbiome imbalance that may be driving what we call autoimmunity, or the nature of the pathogens that may be contributing to what we call autoimmunity, very much likely differs somewhat from patient to patient. So we're unlikely to find this one like drug that cures everyone or something like that, right?
Mm.
We're going to have to do some more individualized type personalized medicine, right? Where we're going to say like, in you seem to have a certain kind of microbiome imbalance that has allowed the following pathogens to better survive and proliferate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we should use maybe the following probiotics in you. We should use, maybe we can support your immune system with the following, whatever it is, either drug or herb or something, right? Like, so that's another thing is like, I'm not sure there's going to be sort of a, like this one blockbuster drug that sort of cures everyone with this stuff. We're moving towards an era of personalized medicine being key.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and yeah, personalized medicine has to be the direction that we go because the standard of care that we use now
Right.
is, I mean, there's one medical doctor who was on the show a while back, and he was kind of joking. He said like, he was a anesthesiologist before. He's sort of focusing on natural stuff now, but he said like, until I see a standard human, I can't just give someone a standard of care because there's no such thing as a standard human.
I agree. The standard of care, I understand the concept of the standard of care, which is that there are treatments that have been better tested that seem to, have been supported by more clinical trials that seem to work for certain patients. But we definitely need to better accept the fact that each patient with their condition often suffers from unique microbiome dysbiosis or unique infectious processes.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to address that, yes, we're going to have to exactly evaluate each patient as their own case, and that may not always be captured in a randomized controlled placebo controlled trial, right? um, and so that's one of the things that I've found difficult is I'm a researcher, and I very much when people do randomized placebo controlled trials that either deem a treatment to be effective or not, that's actually helpful. But I don't think that the effect of every treatment can be captured in a randomized controlled trial. And so I think we need to be more open to the fact that there are therapies and different treatment modalities that we are using that sometimes may not have been tested in that way, but are still very interesting options for patients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because if you think about the amount of people, there's 7.7 billion people on the planet, and then each one of those has each person has trillions of cells within them, and probably orders of magnitude above that with micro in them,
Mhm.
and then it's like trying to figure out something that's going to work for everyone. It just makes no sense.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. There may be, certain medications. So So again, going back to, I think what you originally, I think, found my name for was a treatment that I worked with called the Marshall Protocol, right?
Right.
And we did develop a treatment that attempted to stimulate the immune system in patients with autoimmune disease. And in that case, we used a medication that seemed to actually activate that VDR nuclear receptor that I told you was an important part of the human immune response. And in that case, we did find that patients with a number of different inflammatory conditions responded to that treatment because that one receptor plays an important role in the immune response. So, improving the immune response in patients with different conditions is a sort of general direction that you can head in that might benefit patients with a lot of different issues, right? Just improving the immune response, right?
Mm-hmm.
But beyond that, sort of like the differences that, so there are certain, drugs or compounds or supplements that we may be able to use a little bit more across the board, supplements that help support the immune system generally, or supplements that help break up biofilms in a general sense, right? Things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't say that every single patient exactly is going to have the same response to those treatments. Is going to find, if everyone responds somewhat differently based on the nature exactly of their the unique nature of the disease that they have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it all becomes so complex. When you were just talking there, I was researching the VDR nuclear receptor, and my God, like the scholarly articles. I mean, do you read
Yeah.
that stuff? You go through all that
For
stuff?
sure, yeah. Oh
Wow.
yeah, I've probably read almost every paper on the VDR. A lot
Wow.
of research. No, I read a ton of papers. That's the thing is, I have definitely have a pretty good grasp of the scientific literature, and there are research teams doing incredible research right now. That's one thing that I just really would like to emphasize. There are research teams that are, like I said, better characterizing all these viruses in the human body. They're creating amazing technologies that better allow us to identify them and find them and understand what they're doing, right? I mean, this is stuff we could never do before. When you were talking about electromagnetic radiation and the fact that it could impact microbes or human health, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's actually a team at UCSD that's actually studying the fact that microbes, bacteria, and biofilms can communicate via almost electrical signaling, the same kind of signaling that our neurons use, right? To signal. I basically ion channel mediated electrical signaling. So you have bacteria in different biofilm communities that are communicating with essentially signaling similar to that of our human nervous system, and they're coordinating their behaviors together based off this signaling. And they can even send this signal from a biofilm in one area of the body to a biofilm in a distant area of the body somewhere else. So
Whoa.
we just have research that's allowing us to better understand how these microbes survive, how they signal, how they interact. Really cool stuff, right?
Man.
So I think most of science, especially when it comes to the microbiome, is on the right track. It's just a matter of sort of taking what we're finding in a lot of these research studies and beginning to better apply them towards the actual care of patients.
Mm-hmm. So when you talk about biofilms, how are their communications able to go from the inside of one biofilm to the inside of another biofilm? Because isn't the idea of a biofilm to sort of set itself up for, being protected from the immune system?
Yeah, exactly. It's a community of microbes that basically begin to that will join together and almost they sort of it's like a you can almost picture it like a city. They begin to divide function to a point where some like of the microbes on the outside of the biofilm will better turn on genes that protect the community. So like they'll express proteins that are better at helping the immune system keeping the immune system from targeting the entire community. But there are certain species more maybe on the inside of the biofilm that are helping acquire nutrients for the community. So they basically almost split up function. And in order to split up those functions, they signal in different ways. One way is called quorum sensing. It's a chemical language unique to bacteria in these communities. They secrete these chemical signaling molecules called quorum sensing peptides that other bacteria, even in different areas of the body, can sense. And when they sense that quorum sensing peptide, it's a signal to them, and they will actually change. Microbes in a different biofilm can actually use that signal that comes out of one biofilm to change how they're acting in another community. It's like a way of sharing information. Um, and then this new form of communication, electrical signaling, potassium ion channel mediated electrical signaling, is just a second form of communication. And it's just these action potentials that are cells in one bio channels to cells in the other one.
Wow. So,
Just
Amy, you said right after action potential, you broke up. So, what did you say after that?
just that they can use these action potentials. Just basically, the action potential will just stream out of the biofilm and move towards a different bacterial cell in a different biofilm, and they can acknowledge the signal.
It almost seems like I was listening to a radio show a while back, and they were talking about how our cells are, the actual structure and the DNA makeup of our cells is very little us and mostly microbiome. And he was talking about how we are essentially just stewards of this ecosystem that lives within us. And the more I'm
Right.
talking with you about this and their own communication, it's almost like you know how if you go to a party and a bunch of people are talking over in the corner and they're kind of having a conversation and you kind of walk up, but they're having a party at your house, but they're having their own private conversation. It's kind of like that, right?
It's kind of like that. I mean,
It's
yeah,
crazy.
it's the microbes in and on us, like I said, and under conditions of health, they're acting normally, and then they actually perform some functions that help us. They sometimes help us better digest food. They break down, different food compounds in the gut, and they actually sometimes could be helpful in that sense, right? But under conditions of disease, yeah, they can, form into biofilms or, do stuff that is, yeah, kind of essentially a move against our own health and our own gene expression.
So what you said today is just to me completely fascinating. Like sometimes I've heard it said that if you're reading a book, you will listen to a podcast, listen to a presentation, sometimes you only need one or two things to take away from something for it to just blow your mind. You don't have to remember everything, but just one or two things. And to me, the most interesting things of what you were saying was the whole idea of autoimmunity is at the very least suspect. It needs to be researched more. And then the microbiome having different areas of your body where there's a different microbiome. I'd never heard that before, but this idea of electrical signaling and them, communicating with each other via some sort of a signal is to me so fascinating. Is there anything else that you're researching lately that is just completely blowing your mind that is not necessarily like out there yet? Do you think?
Um, I don't know. I think not really. I mean, those are some of the main topics that I've put out there that I think are the ones that I most want people to better consider. But what I really look at, if you read some of my papers, is the more how organisms in these microbial ecosystems interact with each other to drive disease, and so that kind of gets a little bit complicated. So I didn't go into it too much, but you can see fungi that interact with viruses and viruses that interact with bacteria. And so, what I think my main message would be is when it comes to chronic, I think there are even a lot of patients who uh, feel that chronic infection is at the root of their condition, based off what they've read or even their symptoms, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we've been searching for one single pathogen in a lot of cases. And what I think we need to better study is how different pathogens can interact together to drive chronic inflammatory symptoms. And that means that we may not be, again, looking for that, like when we create tests for these patients, we may not be looking for that single pathogen alone. We might have to better understand how that pathogen is acting as a member of an ecosystem with other organisms all the time. And we better, if that's basically, that means that these may be polymicrobial conditions, conditions in which different microbes, viruses, and fungi interact together to drive symptoms. That's one of the trends that I am most interested in and that I focus on all the time.
Gosh, that's got to be so complex to figure all this stuff out, isn't it? I mean,
It's complex, but actually, I mean, it's people are making real progress. You can do all kinds of molecular modeling to figure it out. You can
wow.
do dynamic studies. You can actually figure out the how microbes are changing their activity and gene expression over time and follow those patterns to see how microbiome communities shift over time to act differently, the different microbes in them. You can just look at the interactions between microbes and just basically study, the different, whether it's like proteins and metabolites they create that are involved in these interactions. So there's lots of ways to do it, and it's complicated, but at the end of the day, the complexity doesn't really get me down. The complexity is exciting because what we realize is there are so many of these conditions that are deemed to be diseases of unknown cause, or something even like psychosomatic in origin, which is ridiculous, right? And so this explosion of new knowledge on the human microbiome and all what we're learning about these organisms in the human body, yeah, it's complicated, but it's also amazing new knowledge that is going to allow us to better understand these conditions and better develop treatments.
Hmm.
And so to me, I welcome it. Bring on
Yeah.
the complexity because
Yeah, I
there are
know.
solutions in that complexity.
That's amazing. And like I said before, I think I heard you, gosh, 9 years ago on some podcast. And in the last 9 years, how has the receptiveness been with people that you know in your community or people out there talking about these types of things? Because all I ever hear about are autoimmune this, autoimmune that, and I never hear of any new knowledge coming out. What's the state of people waking up to this idea, do you think?
It's moving. I mean, it's much better than it was in 2007-ish when I started to publish. I used to feel at that time that I definitely, when I would speak at conferences about this topic, I would generally get some criticism.
Uh huh.
And now when I speak about it, I don't. People listen and they may not be totally agreeing with me, but people are a lot more receptive. And I get emails every day from researchers who are like, look, I found an example of what you're talking about. Here's a pathogen that is involved in autoimmune disease, or we've been studying this, or right. And so I just actually do see there are more research teams working on these same topics. And so, yes, things have definitely improved in terms of what I've been trying to push forward with research. And Yeah, that being said, there's still a lot more work to do to get that information out to way more people. And that's part of why I'm talking to you, because
Mm-hmm.
I think the research community needs to be a lot better about communicating these findings to the general public.
Mm-hmm.
I could point you to at this point thousands of studies that support the role of persistent infection in different conditions, right? And we need to better start explaining that to the public.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's part of my mission. That's why I have a blog. That's why I do this stuff. I try to make my own videos sometimes
Mm-hmm.
because I want people to better understand what I read about every day in well regarded journals, scientific articles and journals and
Mm-hmm.
research.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, it's so fascinating, this whole world. So a couple final questions to sort of wrap up the show. We had a listener, so I want to ask you about like some practical things, because I know that getting into this, you start splitting apart everything and looking at the nitty gritty and the fine details and all of the interactions going on inside the body, and so it's really challenging to come up with sort of, even whether it's medical or natural, blanket ideas for people. But I want to know a little bit about that. Like, what can we do to be healthy just in light of all this? But then we had a listener question in the chat room, and he really wanted to know, how did you get better?
Uh, um, well, I did this treatment called the Marshall Protocol, which was a treatment that I helped develop with a researcher named Trevor Marshall, who's brilliant, and one of my best mentors. And it was a treatment that activates the immune system to better target pathogens. And we also took there's pulsed antibiotics that many patients use to better target organisms. And there is a Herxheimer response that results repeatedly with this treatment. It's a Herxheimer generating treatment, but I did do that for the course of several years and I improved. And I want to be clear, I actually am not fully improved. I still have an ME/CFS diagnosis. I still have some symptoms. I still have some pain. I still have some trouble sleeping. But that treatment brought me from being bedridden and having zero ability to move my body or speak out loud to now. And so I don't, it's a very, very difficult treatment. And I've found that again, patients with late disease, and so I don't, it's something to
Hey,
just
sorry, Amy.
yeah.
Sorry. VMix kind of randomly cuts out, so I apologize for that. But you said patients with late stage, and then after that, you cut out for a bit.
Yeah. So what we found though with that treatment, which helped me, was that patients with later stage disease, the sort of Herxheimer they got was very difficult to manage. And so what after that treatment, uh, after seeing, patients recovered on that treatment or felt or improved on that treatment, including myself. But what I did was I transitioned from working on that treatment alone to trying to work for a paradigm that would better support generally in medicine the idea of supporting or stimulating the immune system in patients with chronic disease. Because right now, we can do Herxheimer-based therapies. We can do those. Those are all possible things that patients can do, but they need more support. One of the things that we found is that the average physician does not understand what Herxheimer is, right? So when patients would do this treatment called the Marshall Protocol, and they would say that they were experiencing a Herxheimer reaction, um, their physicians would pull them off the treatment, right? So, I mean, we had trouble because it's not understood enough yet in science that activating the immune system to target pathogens may be a good treatment direction. So around the year like 2010, I stopped working with that treatment alone and began to better push for research that generally for essentially a research and scientific and medical community that would be more open to that kind of treatment, which is something that we really, really need. And you'll see me write about that. I write articles about that too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, I think, when it comes to treatment, that again, also in addition to doing the Marshall Protocol, I've worked with doctors that did some homeopathic stuff for infection. I think Byron White's products are really good for that. He had some antiviral and antibacterial drops, homeopathic drops that really helped me. I also did, I've also just experimented with some different antifungals and antiviral medications that have helped me a little bit. Um, and definitely some different supplements that also are antimicrobial supplements. I'm interested, for example, there are certain antimicrobial mushrooms and things that I think have helped me a bit. So,
Mm-hmm.
I basically just go in the direction of antimicrobial compounds to a lot of extent. That's what I've done to myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so super fascinating. So, in light of this changing sort of environmental world with 5G and different
Mm,
things going on, more antibiotics people are taking, more stress, more exposure to blue light, more
yeah.
stress on every level. What are some general things in light of everything you know about the microbiome, autoimmune diseases, biofilms, all the stuff that we've talked about? Like, are there some general things that you think would be good regardless of whether or not someone's in a chronic state or they're just relatively healthy? What are your thoughts about maintaining good health?
Yeah, so if you're healthy, definitely try to maintain it. You want to just, I think, um, okay, put it this way. My brother-in-law is an athlete and he's very healthy, but he uses a range of he does some very well-studied probiotics. He does some antioxidant stuff. He actually takes oil of oregano sometimes when he has a sinus thing.
Uh huh.
And he uses a line of products created by an ex surfer, Laird Hamilton, who has a range of products that have electrolytes and basic stuff like that. And he's and he also eats really well. One thing I could recommend, and this depends of course on people's budget, which is unfortunate, is definitely if you can, try to not buy meat with antibiotics and hormones. It's really not. It's unfortunate, that meat, because the animals have been treated with antibiotics so aggressively, is likely to harbor more pathogens in the meat. The antibiotic resistance genes have actually just been shown to be able to pass through the food supply, through that kind of meat. Again, and when it comes to vegetables and food, again, the more, again, organic or just locally grown stuff, it's a general trend. Like, if you kind of know where your food comes from, you're getting sort of local products that you see are hopefully treated with maybe less pesticides, less chemicals. I do definitely think that eating food in its most natural state is definitely probably helpful for maintaining health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's all the basic stuff, right? I mean, all just super easy, simple stuff.
Exactly. I mean, and I encourage people and patients to just be as proactive as possible. I think, I've known patients who are just incredible at, doing, they get online and they research stuff, and they are able to make intelligent decisions about what to do and stuff to take, and they test things out, and within reason, I encourage that. I think that's what I did to get better. Obviously, like, you want to make sure that you can read and find as much evidence for what you're doing as possible. But I think there's also incredible value in patient case histories. A lot of times when it comes either to fecal microbiome transplantation, you know what that is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Or just whatever these things are. I always, even as a researcher, I will, talk to the patients that are doing this. I think that that's really important. Even as researchers, we should be continually talking to the patients who are actually have the conditions we're studying, and asking them what they're doing, and how they feel and what's going on, right? And so that's something that I always do. I really believe in the power of patient reported feedback, feedback from patients on how they're doing in different interventions. And that's something, so basically, I've seen, there are, for example, patients that I regularly talk to that protect themselves from electromagnetic radiation in different ways,
Mm-hmm.
and that helps them feel better sometimes, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so that's a major thing. And actually, Trevor Marshall, who I work with still, he's studying the effects of radiation on the human body right now, and he's very concerned about the 5G network. And so there are all kinds of issues like that. We just need to stay on top of these things, and make sure we're just being proactive and not assuming that just because the telecommunication industry did a study on the safety of 5G means that everything's fine.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Yeah. We're actually going to have Trevor on the show here pretty soon, so that's going to be fun.
Really
Yeah. It's
good.
going to be cool.
All good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he has just he has endless information.
That's gonna be
I
fun.
think
I wanted to ask you before you leave. I wanted to ask you something that I've heard about in the natural health community for a long time, but I don't know if it's true. And you are probably the one closest to knowing if this is true or not.
Mhm.
Several doctors we've had on the show, both medical doctors and regular, just naturopathic doctors, have mentioned to us that it's possible, not that it happens every time, but it's possible when a person takes an antibiotic, either for the first time or on multiple occasions, that there are beneficial bacteria that get destroyed. And we all sort of know that. But what they're saying is that these bacteria sometimes are never able to repopulate and never able to grow again. So what they were saying was, I think one of the doctors mentioned that there's supposed to be over 1,000 different strains of these sort of beneficial bacteria, but now we're down to like 200, and that's one of the reasons why you're seeing a lot of these quote autoimmune diseases. And I'm wondering, does
Mhm.
antibiotics, does it or can it kill beneficial bacteria that we need in our body permanently unless we reinoculate?
It depends. I would say the scientific research on that is still in early stages. There are teams that are looking at exactly that. What happens when, for example, we give a child an antibiotic for an ear infection? What happens to the microbes in their gut or other locations, right? The antibiotic will kill a lot of the microbes, and the populations will diminish, right? Now we do see that a lot of times the ecosystem rebounds after the antibiotic. And in some cases, it doesn't seem to be that different than before the antibiotic. So it can basically, sometimes the microbiome in an area of the body can get knocked down by an antibiotic, but it can repopulate successfully. That we can see, but um, there are other studies which show that sometimes maybe the community does not come back to where it was before, right? So, yes, bacteria and other organisms will come back, especially bacteria, but maybe not the same exact ones that were there before, and maybe not in the same, dynamic as were there before, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so that could definitely and is definitely a major issue. I very much agree with that when it comes to another thing we need to be looking at with chronic disease is the fact that because if we use antibiotics reasonably, I would say, for very if we should antibiotics are a necessary tool. Sometimes people have a very serious infection and they need to take antibiotics. One of the biggest problems we have is that we overprescribe antibiotics. So for example, antibiotics are prescribed commonly for the flu, which makes no sense because the flu is a virus and antibiotics only target bacteria, right? So no one should ever get an antibiotic when they get the flu, but it's become sort of this medical tradition to just give people a course of antibiotics when they get the flu, right? That there's a lot of advocacy on that. That needs to change. We have to give people antibiotics very, very, very carefully under very certain conditions because yes, antibiotics completely change our microbiome ecosystems and we do not know the long-term impact of those changes at the
Mm.
moment.
Yeah, it's super super fascinating when you start realizing like what happens to the human body when beneficial bacteria are gone. But then like what you're saying too is the ratios get affected and that becomes an issue. And when you're talking about like you were before, where these bacteria are allegedly talking to one another, and so there's communications going on, and all of a sudden if there's an entire group that's no longer there to able to communicate to some other area of the body, then communication is breaking down as well. And so there's all kinds of other issues too.
Yeah, so I see it going in it's two ways, but they're connected. Some people say there's missing microbes. Let's say antibiotics will knock down bacterial populations in the human body, and some of those microbes don't come back, and then so we're essentially creating a situation in which certain microbes that may actually be important for balance and health in the microbiome are being eliminated. But I focus a bit more is the pathogens and that will, right? So let's say there was a forest and there were a lot of deer, right? And then we use something to knock down all the deer. Well, who knows what's going to happen then? I mean, maybe the deer were fine and maybe they were eating some important plants and they were actually playing an important role in keeping the forest in good shape. Now, when there's less deer, other animals can come in and fill those gaps. So we might find that we have, way more bears, and who knows what bears do now? We're throwing things off, right? So what happens is, yeah, you have these community shifts in what's happening, in which microbes that may be beneficial or more innocuous may become may be eradicated or whatever, and pathogens that can better cause disease may be grow in number, right? So that's what I mean. It's not just necessarily in disease. We're not just looking at one pathogen. We're actually looking at how communities of pathogens can shift towards a state like that, a state of imbalance, a state that can promote disease.
So, gosh, so interesting. Amy, thanks so much for being on the show, man. That was just like that was one of the we've done 635 shows, and that might be one of the most interesting shows I've ever done.
Well, I'm so glad you feel that way. Thank you for your interest. And I really think it's great how you are doing this show and just getting information out to people. It's exactly what we should be doing. And I really appreciate your interest in my work.
Yeah, man, your work is incredible, and thank you for your patience too at the beginning with all this audio technical stuff.
Sorry to everyone. I probably will have to rethink my internet connection after this. But I
That's so funny.
because I don't know, it might have been my microphone on my
That's so funny. Well, you know what, Amy, let's do it again because to me, you and your work is so fascinating to me. So if you run across any new research, let's just do it again anytime you're available.
Sure. I'll talk anytime. All
Okay.
right. Well, then let's stay in touch.
Awesome. All right, Amy, thank you so much, and Have a great rest of your week, okay?
You too, Justin. All right, take care.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, guys. So I get this question a lot. I hope you guys enjoyed that interview. That was fascinating. So I get this question a lot. What is, or who are your top 3 or 4 guests that you've ever had on? Amy just came up and is going to be in the top 3, or yeah, top 3, I'd say. But I want to share with you the other 2 guests too, and that way you guys can glean more information about these amazing people. Before that, though, I wanted to tell you guys about, I think I just shut something down. I wanted to tell you guys about the Relax Far Infrared sauna. If you guys have not checked it out, we are still running the sale for this thing. And if you guys have not familiar with this thing, it is the best sauna, in my opinion, out there. I use this thing every day. Last night I was in there for about 35 minutes, about 10 o'clock at night after the kids went to bed, because it's not like a discipline. I love going in this thing, and it's incredible and what it does, and it helps to detoxify your body. It's one of the best things that you can do for your overall immune system, and we ship these things all over the world, and what I like about it is that your head sits out. Okay, so like you're not inside a wooden enclosure and just staring at the walls. I get to watch documentaries and I get to watch Netflix videos and I get to have a great time and just by myself sweating like crazy. I'm usually sweating within like probably the first 10 minutes. I'm just dripping sweat. And what's cool about this thing is that it heats up and it gets hot immediately. So you don't have to preheat this thing. It's encased with a silver lining, and it uses a far infrared heat that actually bounces off. It's invisible, this far infrared heat, but it bounces off the inside the silver lining of this device. And Dr. Rhonda Patrick was on, or has said before that like you increase heat shock proteins, you increase your immune system by up to 40%. There's a 40% decrease in all-cause mortality for people that use the sauna on a regular basis 4 to 7 times a week. This thing, sauna therapy, has been used for centuries, and I love it. It's portable. You can lend it to a friend. You don't have to knock down a wall. It's very, very low EMF, and you just sit inside there and you just relax, and man, it is just an incredible machine, and it's won several awards. It's built in Taiwan, and it's just an incredible machine. So we're still running a deal on this. So if you're interested in the Relax Far Infrared Sauna, make sure to email me, Justin, Justin, at extremehealthradio.com, and this will be available through the end of today. Today's Cyber Monday. So the discount will be available for those of you that happen to watch live through the end of the day today. So make sure to email me if you want more information about where we ship it. We ship it all over the world, and people have been buying these things like crazy for the past, I've been using mine for about 7 years. I do about 30 minutes a day, and it's just impacted my health in a tremendous way. So I just love it. Love this machine. And then I wanted to tell you guys too about the Magnetico mattress sleep pad. One of the things that we're talking about during this show was EMF and how EMF affects your biology. And the doctor that I was referencing, Dr. Lee Cowden, I think it's Cowden. Dr. Lee Cowden was talking about the fungus and how they proliferate up to 600 times more outside of a Faraday cage than when they are put inside the Faraday cage. This is fungus replicating, exposure to EMF signals. So this is interesting. One of the ways that I and Kate and myself and our little twin boys offset some of these EMF frequencies is by sleeping on a Magnetico mattress pad. Now, magnetism is, if you start learning about like what Amy was talking about in today's show, just about how these things, these pathogens and microbes and bacteria and fungus and mold and yeast and all these things communicate with one another. And if you start looking at the work of Dr. Jack Kruse and start realizing that we are magnetic beings, we're electrical beings long before we're physical. And like we're saying in today's show, like we are so much more than just our own DNA. These pathogens actually manipulate our own DNA, which is fascinating stuff. And so when it comes down to it, we're electrical, we're magnetic long before we're physical. And bathing your body in a field of magnetism every time you sleep for 8 hours is one of the best ways to improve your overall immunity, your body's ability to carry an electric charge, to enhance the body's ability to produce ATP and let electrons spin at a higher and faster rate. It's all due to magnetism. And there's a doctor, gosh, what was his name? Dr. I guess I'm forgetting his name right now. Gosh, trying to think of the guy's name. What was his name? Oh, Dr. Becker. That's right. Robert O. Becker was able to regrow the limbs of salamander in the 1960s using a magnetic and electric field. And so this stuff has an effect on our physiology. And so that's why I love sleeping in a magnetic field like this. So we did a whole show with Dr. Dean Bonley all about how this actually works. Here's a picture of Kate sitting on ours when she was still pregnant, when we just installed ours. And these things are like 70 pounds each. They're super heavy. I think they have like 1,200 magnets in them, and they're incredibly strong. And we right now have the 10 Gauss system, but there's a super sleep system that we're going to upgrade to pretty soon that's 20 Gauss. And as you guys know, the electric field of the Earth, or the magnetic field, I should say, has been decreasing, significantly over time. This is happening to a lot of the different environmental aspects that we need to survive. Like oxygen used to be around 30%. Now it's in the low to mid teens, especially in big cities. Oxygen levels decreasing, air pressure is getting lower. So it's, magnetism has decreased, some people say, over 80% in the last 4,000 years. And so bringing more magnetism into your life is critical, I think, for our electrons, our photons, our mitochondrial health. This is critical. And so this is why I love this Magnetico sleep pad. And I think the good folks over there, they'll give you 10% off. So if you guys want to put in the code EHR10 and get a 10% discount, you'll get 10% when you buy your Magnetico. So make sure to go do that, do some research on this thing. And when you purchase one, let me know, and I'd love to hear more about it. If you're watching on YouTube, all of these links to the Juve red light therapy, the Stockton Aloe-1, and the Relax Far Infrared Sauna, as well as the Magnetico, will be in the description if you're watching on YouTube. So I hope you guys enjoyed that interview. Did you, like I said before, excuse me, we're supposed to go an hour with her. I told her before the show that we would go an hour, but then it took us a long time to get the technology right and the audio right, so we kind of went longer. But I have to say, like I mentioned to her, this is episode 635, right? We've talked to some pretty high-level people. We've talked to some pretty cutting-edge research authors, medical doctors, naturopathic doctors, chiropractors, all kinds of people. And I have to say there's 3 people that have impacted me. And I'm not saying they're the best, but they just impacted me and my thinking the most. Now Amy is definitely in the top 3. So the top 3, and I think that they could be probably, I would say probably tied. They're all impacted me tremendously in a unique way. Rarely do I hear something that's really unique to me when it comes to natural health and natural healing. I hear a lot of stuff, but a lot of people are advocating different things, and I rarely hear something that's very, very unique. And today's show was something where I just was blown away, and I hope you guys were too. So Amy is definitely in the top 3. The other 2 are Dr. Richard Massey. He was the medical anesthesiologist that I referred to earlier about the standard human. He brings a lot of interesting information to the table with regards to our emotional, spiritual health. Fascinating guy, and I don't think anyone has impacted me more than Dr. Richard Massey's work on recall healing and the spiritual emotional connection to disease. And you would be blown away to learn more about how recall healing, specifically how our family line and generations all tie together. And in the same way that Amy was talking about our fungus and mitochondria and bacteria and mold and yeast and viruses and bacteria, all these things interact with each other. So viruses interact, or bacteria interact with other bacteria, but then bacteria interacts and sometimes can be hijacked by viruses. And fungus is talking to yeast, and fungus is talking to mold, and all these things, there's things going on in the same way that all of these things inside of us are interconnected. We ourselves represent one of those bacteria in a long family line of people in our family. And we are also connecting with generations that come before us and generations that come after us. And it sounds kind of woo-woo and weird, but when you start looking at the results of people like Dr. Massey working with people and seeing these incredible turnarounds with people's health by having relationships with and not trying to fight against bacteria, mold, fungus, and all these things. When you start understanding the inclusion of how the family line all ties together, and we're all connected. If you look at the quantum world, quantum physics and superstring theory and all this kind of weird stuff that I've only read a few books about, I don't know anything about it, just other than reading a few books and things like that. But when you start realizing all of this stuff is intricately connected, all of it, not just our microbiome, but us with other people, and you start understanding how we are inextricably linked to our own life in some weird, bizarre way, to the journey into the path that we are led to take, we're linked to that in some way. We're also linked to each other, and we're also linked to our family lineage. And so all of this stuff is totally and completely linked together. And when we start excluding ourselves from that, in the same way that you take an antibiotic and you kill off a whole species of bacteria, when you start excluding yourself from your family and from your friends and from other people, and start living a lifestyle where you're alone all the time, this is where disease happens, because we're meant to be together. And so this work that Dr. Massey does on recall healing, and how cancer and heart attacks are the body's way of healing, and you would never think of it like that. In the same way that Amy's looking at like autoimmune diseases as being something that may not even exist, we're looking at, from a recall healing perspective, cancers and heart attacks and every other disease as your body's way of actually healing itself. And the mechanism of why and how that happens is brilliantly explained in the shows that we've done with Dr. Richard Massey. And to me, you can't just focus on the physical. You focus on the physical only, and you leave out a massive part of what makes up life. Like, what is that invisible process that's causing these bacteria and microbes to talk to one another? What is this invisible thing that's happening inside of us that we'll probably never be able to understand or measure? Whatever that is controlling all of the mechanisms and the communication and the desires of these microbes. And so there's a much deeper aspect to all of this stuff. So when you just focus on the spiritual, you get kind of weird, and it doesn't, you get kind of woo-woo, and you start acting weird and dressing weird and all that kind of stuff. And then when you start focusing only on the science, only on the physical stuff, then you're leaving out an entire piece that all of this stuff merges together. And so Dr. Massey and his work is completely the other end of the spectrum of the stuff that Amy was talking about. Not really other end of the spectrum, just different, right? It's all inclusive here. And then the other person that you probably know is Dr. What's his name? Dr. Jack Kruse, and his work with light and frequency, and how the mitochondria controls genetic expression. And the main way that you control the mitochondria, there's several different ways: magnetism, electricity, temperature control, vibration. But the main way is light, and how light affects our eyes. It affects our nervous system. It affects our DHA levels. It affects how far the electrons have to travel across the mitochondrial membrane, which affects ATP. Lowered ATP has a cascading effect on the entire body. You would never think any of this stuff about just light, right? Like, just standard light indoors is, what I'm learning, way more important than the food we eat. Orders of magnitude more important than the food we eat. And he calls that non-native EMF, and that includes Wi-Fi and signals like that, and dirty electricity. And so I think all of this to say that, like, all of these things and these people that are interesting and fascinating to me don't even really talk about food much, which is fascinating, right? Like, all we hear about is food. And obviously the food we eat affects our microbiome, but so does stress, and so does EMF, and so does, most importantly, light. And so, yeah, if you were to ask me the three most influential people that we've ever had on, I'd have to say Amy Proal, Dr. Jack Kruse, and Dr. Richard Massey. There's some other amazing people too. I mean, not to say that anybody else is lesser, but as far as me learning interesting information that really gets me excited about life and what we're doing here, and coming closer to the ability for us to be able to treat and overcome diseases, chronic degenerative diseases or even prevent them from happening in the first place. This is what excites me. Light, this microbiome stuff that Amy was talking about, and recall healing. I mean, nothing to me is as fascinating as that stuff. And so let me pull up our YouTube channel and see if you guys are chit-chatting away. Yeah, a lot of you guys still here. Hey, Kate. Awesome. I'm going to be leaving here in just a few minutes. You're an Animal says, I first heard about Jack Kruse a year ago while doing research on pigments and EMF. Yeah, Jack Kruse, I mean, he's fascinating. The problem with Jack Kruse is, I love the guy a lot, but the problem is that people tend to think that he's the end-all, be-all when it comes to light and or anything. You know, I think one of the things that I want to highlight is that all of these people, even Amy or Dr. Massey or Dr. Kruse, I mean, we all just have a little piece of what's actually going on. We don't have any idea of what's actually going on inside the human body. We can look, we can kind of extrapolate some things, but overall, I think that, you know, none of these people should be bowed down to as gurus. You know, they're all bringing something really unique and important to the table, and not everyone has all the answers. And so just in light of the fact that, you know, this whole microbiome thing is relatively new. Like I mentioned on today's show, like 15 years ago, no one really understood the gut-brain connection and how, you know, we have a second brain in our gut and how that affects our health and all of that. We just heard statements, platitudes, generalizations from, you know, ancestors years ago that would say, you know, you know, all disease begins in the gut, like Hippocrates said, but we didn't know why. And so, but now we're learning more. We're learning more every day. And I suspect that even Amy Proal, even Dr. Jack Kruse, even Dr. Richard Massey, even them combined with everyone else on the planet knows probably about 0.5% of what's actually happening in the body. But we know enough to be able to alter our physiology and to give ourselves some control and to be able to alter the outcome of a disease process that might be happening inside of our body, and to be able to make peace with it and to include it into our life and to allow it to pass peacefully through us so that we can continue living our purpose, right? That's what it's really all about. Oh, cool. So you guys are saying some cool things. I'm just looking. Super Show Justin, light 48% to the brain, food 9. Yes. What's his name did a good video on this, actually, how our brain and nervous system uses light more than it does food. Nathan Walls did a good video about this. Mr. Grimm, good to see you guys here, by the way. Mr. Grimm says, Kenneth Wheeler has some great insights on the secrets of light and magnetism. Cool, because this is one area that we're going to be focusing on, spirituality, light, and magnetism. EMF, we're going to have Martin Paul on the show here pretty soon. I'm going to look him up, Kenneth Wheeler. Does he have a website, by the way? I can invite him on if he looks like a cool guest. Let me do Kenneth Wheeler Light into Google, and I'll look into him too. I appreciate, Mr. Grimm, your thing. Miss you, Kate. Can't wait for you to be back with Justin, Chris. I know. See, Chris, we got to get someone to watch our little baby boys for a couple hours 3 times a week when we do the show. That's what we need to do. And I need to figure out the microphone situation too and how this is going to work with having Kate on the shows. But I love it when she's on. She's so much fun, and it's really great. Jojo Bach, we love Justin too for all he's doing for all of us, and you too for being there. Support him as well by being a wonderful wife partner who has the same passion as him. I know Kate really wants to be back on the show, Jojo. She's really itching to get back. So we just got to figure it out. 63574 says, also babies are in the gut and they influence what mothers like to eat. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting too. Isn't it interesting what she said about how the viruses will overtake the bacteria, and the name she used for that, I forget what it was, but they'll overtake the bacteria and then cause the genes to express themselves in a way that they're not supposed to be expressed. Really fascinating, right? So, you know, a lot of times our food cravings are not the cravings of ourselves at all, but the cravings of our bacteria. And, you know, like it's fascinating too that, you know, when we realize we've lost a lot of the bacteria in our life, in our gut, by the misuse of antibiotics, you know, it starts to become an issue much bigger than we think about, because we think, okay, like doctors think, oh, well, if you take this antibiotic, just take some probiotics afterwards. But, the antibiotic is going to kill certain microbes. And the microbes that it kills might not be the microbes that you take or the bacteria that you take as a probiotic after. So you might have, like, let's say you have bacteria A and bacteria B, and you take an antibiotic, and the antibiotic kills all of bacteria A, right? But the supplement that you're supposed to take after an antibiotic, which is a probiotic, if you take that after, maybe that replenishes all of microbiome B or bacteria B, but doesn't affect A. So now you've just doubled up on what you have of bacteria B, but now you have no A bacteria at all. And so it's really fascinating. I think this whole gut thing is way more than we ever even imagined. And I think it's really fascinating that this stuff actually, it carries itself through to our tissues and to our skin, to our event horizon, which is our solar panel, which is our skin. It affects everything. And so I hope you guys like that show. That was a really cool one. Just in case says Dr. Tim O'Shea, the doctor within us, is someone to look into for a future show. Okay, cool. Yeah, I know about Dr. Tim O'Shea. I think he's up in San Francisco, actually. And Dr. Bergman, who we partner with on the Extreme Health Academy, is friends with him. So I gotta get him back on. It's so funny. I just put his name into Google, and the first thing that came up was Dr. Tim O'Shea quack. So that's how I know he's a good guest. If Google thinks he's a quack, or if he's on Quack Watch, then I know he's a good guest to have on, because, man, that's crazy. That's just crazy how they influence. Have you guys seen, too, underneath the videos in Facebook or in YouTube, you'll see like a Wikipedia article or a link to the actual information that they're trying to give you, like the mainstream. Like if you type into YouTube, "Are vaccines safe?" or something, and then you click on a video to watch it, underneath the video, they're starting to put now, quote, research articles saying that, yes, vaccines are safe. Or, this is happening with a lot of different subjects out there where they're putting research articles from mainstream sources like Wikipedia underneath article or videos and audios of things out there on the internet. It's just unbelievable how badly they want to influence public opinion based on people that are searching for the opposite types of information, right? So really, really interesting how there's a war for your mind and a war in our culture for how we think. Most definitely. 63574. Yeah, we had the medical medium on the show. He was on a while back. Here's the thing, something I'd love your insights to, all of you guys in the chat room. I'd love your insights on this. I realized the other day that it's possible. So we publish, if you're subscribed to us on iTunes, we release about 2 to 3 shows per week. Right now, it takes a long time to produce the shows, as you can imagine. But on YouTube here, the shows are 3 times a week happening in real time, and so they're not really matched up yet with regards to numbers. But here's what I want your input on. If you could let me know in the chat room, I'd be curious. We can republish old shows. So if you are subscribed to us on iTunes right now, I just republished a show that we did with not doctor, but Doug Kaufman from knowthecause.com. And he talks about fungus. And the basis of his entire work is this connection between fungus and cancer, based on the work of Tullio Simoncini, who was a doctor who subsequently lost his medical license in Italy. But this Doug Kaufman is a really great guy, got a great website called Know the Cause, and he was on a couple years ago. But this information, it's not relegated to time, So like what he was talking about is so beneficial for us today. So I'm curious, would you guys like it if you guys are subscribed to us on iTunes, which I highly recommend you do. Please do. That would help us a lot. And write us a review and give us a rating there on iTunes if you can. We're trying to get our podcast out to more people so more people can hear the stuff that like we just talked about today so that they can be empowered. But if you're subscribed to iTunes, would you like it if we released a show every day? Because we have, like I said, 635 shows. And the other day on Instagram, I asked you guys if what guests you would like us to have on. And I have to say, like 60% of the people that mentioned different people were guests that have already been on. But it's most of the time, if you're keeping up to date in real time stuff, would, you miss a lot of those 634 shows that we've done. So would you like us to release an archive of past shows in the iTunes feed so that on your podcast player you get new shows every single day? Say yes in the chat room if you could, or no, or how many days you would prefer that. Like, would you like a show 5 days a week? So 2 or 3 new shows and 2 or 3 old shows to make up 5 shows a week. Let me know in the comments. I would love to know what your thoughts are about that. And if you're listening on a podcast later on in time, send me an email or respond on this show page, extremehealthradio.com/635. But if you're in the YouTube chat room, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. Justin says, Dr. Tim is the kind of doctor that reads the vaccine inserts and explains it to the audience. There's your quack, right? Yeah, a doctor that actually does his research. Shocking, right? Dr. Tent, we're going to have on JoJo. We've reached out to him. I think he might even be scheduled too. We reach out to people every day. And so when you guys send us emails of guests, if we like them, most likely we've heard of them. And so we're going to get most of the people that you recommend on the show. And so, yeah, let me know if you guys, I think Dr. Bergman would have a lot to talk about with the plant-based diet experts. Yeah, Dr. Bergman's been on the show too. And if you are unfamiliar, let me show you the academy that we have set up with Dr. Bergman. Have you guys checked it out yet? It's really cool, man. He's doing let me bring you to our courses section here. He's doing a whole course this month on diabetes and blood sugar issues. So let me show this to you guys. This is like where the rubber meets the road with our work. Because like in today's show, we talked a lot about theory and talked a lot about different things, but practically, how do you put all this stuff together? And so this is one of the things that we do inside the Extreme Health Academy. So you can see our last month was about adrenal health. We've got deep sleep mastery. I'm going to be presenting some courses in there too pretty soon, as soon as I can get some free time to record, because I got a lot of stuff that I can share that's different, that most of you guys probably had never heard of before, just being exposed to all this information. Heart health, building invincible immune system, prevent and heal cancer, autoimmune disease solutions, balancing your hormones, the complete guide to improving digestion, the nervous system, a yoga course, which is really cool. There's a whole yoga course in here for you guys to go through a day-by-day yoga program. It's really cool. And getting the healing process started. This itself is, I think it's like 5 hours long. The 3 stressors course. This getting the healing process started, this is like where you start with your healing. If you don't know where to start, this is 29 videos, 2 hours, 47 minutes long. And we talk about, the nervous system, the brain and spinal cord, your body's intelligent, finding the cause of disease, the keys to health, all these things that are involved in your body's ability to be healthy are covered inside the Extreme Health Academy. So I want to let you guys know about that. We are working with Dr. John Bergman on that. And so it's really a lot of fun. We answer your questions live every week. It's a good place. And I think that you can find a lot of people to help you. A lot of people, there's over 1,000 people in the forums talking to one another, helping each other, supporting each other, motivating each other. It's just an incredible place. So if you guys are interested and you're watching on a YouTube video, there's a link down below in the description, and you can enter the code EHR14 to get a free 14-day trial if you guys are interested in that. I'm curious about what you think about the podcasts. Mr. Grimm says Dr. Bergman. Yeah, we've had Dr. Bergman on the show. Dr. McDougall. I do know of Dr. McDougall, but I haven't had him on the show yet. So let me put him into a new tab here so that I can get him going there. Dr. McDougall. He is an American physician. He talks a lot about... Oh, wow, look at that. Yeah, got some good videos. So, yeah, we can consider having him on the show as well. Let's see. What else do you guys have? Interesting. Jojo said he's going to be ZZ Captain. Dr. John Bergman is cool, very funny, and very knowledgeable. He is. Yeah, you should definitely check out the Extreme Health Academy. It would be great. I made the connection to nagalase in vaccines and how all vaccines potentially have nagalase after injection due to fermentation process being hindered by formalin. I think you mean formaldehyde while in the vial. You know, what's interesting, Mr. Grimm, is that we're doing some research on nagalase too, and that was the idea behind a lot of those doctors being, some people say they're suicides, but those doctors being systematically just killed. Recently, that Aaron from HealthNet News was covering, but it was this connection between nagalase and and the connection between that and the immune system. And so we're going to get some people on talking about nagalase and what it does in the immune system. Yeah, good stuff. Dr. Gundry, yeah, we've had Dr. Gundry on the show. He was on just a little while ago. Dr. Hyman, yeah, Dr. Hyman, he's got a new podcast that is cool. That Dr. I forget what his name is. His first name, Dr. Hyman. Yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed that show. Make sure to go check out the Extreme Health Academy, guys. I'm telling you guys, it's an amazing place. I'm telling you, we're working on actually a database too. So we cover all of your health questions every week. We cover your health questions live with Dr. Bergman, myself, and we do different sessions, and we categorize and log all of the answers and building a database now so you guys can get our responses to everything that we've ever talked about inside the Academy. So it's something that's going to be rolled out in the next couple months. It's a huge undertaking, but I think it's going to be huge for helping people find the answers to their health conditions. So that's happening very soon. Dr. Gundry is not broad enough to get the whole problem. Well, that's what I'm saying is a lot of people follow these people, Dr. Gundry or Dr. Hyman or Dr. whoever else, and they think that these doctors are the one-stop shop. It's like what Amy was talking about before. It's what she was talking about. She was talking about before that, like, there's not a medication that's going to fix all of your problems. In the same way there's not a medication that's going to fix all your problems, there's not a doctor that's going to fix all your problems either. All of these doctors, Dr. Bergman, Dr. Hyman, Dr. Gundry, all the people that we've had on our show, Dr. Cruz, they all just give a snapshot of their opinions and their insights and their research. But putting all of this stuff together is kind of where I come in and helping to bring in different aspects of helping people look at areas of their life that they'd never thought about with regards to their own genetic breakdown. And so having been exposed to over 630 people and also being involved in the natural health community since 2003, I've listened to just about everybody. I've listened to so much stuff, studied so many different angles and materials of things, and putting it all together in a comprehensive way for all of us to be able to benefit from. Because, some people are very familiar with, like, let's say the big thing going around right now is biophotons and sun and how that affects our DHA and our mitochondria. But some of those people don't understand the work of Dr. Richard Massey and recall healing and how spiritual emotional issues impact our health. Some people understand both those things, but don't understand the microbiome to the extent that Amy Proal does. And then someone who understands her work may not understand the light piece. And so there's so many aspects where a lot of these guests that we have on our show are so hyper-focused into their own field that they think that, their field is the answer to every health problem. But in actuality, there's a lot of different angles and ways to look at what's going on with our health so that we can take something that makes sense to us from these different areas that people are doing research in. And so, the light piece may not be the end all be all for you. The keto or the high sugar or the stuff that, what's that other guy's doctor? I don't know. He's all into it. But there's all these different aspects and pieces to our health that we need to consider and bring in and at least know about them. And so that's why I think it's really important to bring all of this stuff together. Dr. Naram. No, I don't know who he is, Sam. Naram. Not sure about him. But you know what, too, guys, if you could, it would be really helpful to me if you were to send me an email. If you really want a guest on the show, send me an email, justin@extremehealthradio.com. And I can get into some of that stuff. Sam wants to know, do you cover energy healing? Yeah, we've talked about it a lot. Ultimately, the body is energy. That's really what it's all about. Getting down to getting rid of all the physical ailments and the physical components that make up our biology, it's all energy. It's all spiritual, emotional. And then there's this weird kind of tie in with the physical. And that's where light comes in to bridge the gap between emotional, spiritual, and the physical. That's where biophotons and physics comes in to tie these two worlds together. And then you have microbes tied in there as well. And so you have all these things. I suspect after doing a show like this, I suspect that EMF is going to play a much bigger role in our health than we ever would know. I really do. I think the EMF, the 5G rollout coming here pretty soon, in my opinion, like I've mentioned this before on many occasions, since 1879, when America became electrified, this is the biggest environmental impact, I think, and it's going to affect so many different aspects of our health that we just have no idea yet. It's going to it breaks down cell membranes, gut-brain connections, blood-brain barrier. It does so allows 1,000 times more calcium to enter into the cell than what should be there from the interstitial fluid in the bloodstream. It causes microbes and specifically fungus to proliferate in ways we never imagined. I mean, this is going to be huge. And so understanding our environment and getting back to nature is the key for all of this, guys. So hope you guys enjoyed this show. Dude, this was 2 hours and 30 minutes. I need to get going. It's almost 2 o'clock and I need to eat breakfast here. So love you guys so much. Julia, thank you so much for your comments. This is why I love the show. It is giving us an insight to all aspects of health. I've learned so much. Thanks. Oh, you're so welcome. And you too, Angie. I appreciate you guys being here. So cool. Sam, ZZ Captain, Jojo Bach. Have you ever interviewed Erin Elizabeth? No, you know what? We were going to have her on the show a while back when she came to our neck of the woods for some conferences, but I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure, I've got some reservations about having her on. Maybe I can tell you, privately, but I like her and people like her are very important, but I'm not so sure we will but you know what? It's possible. It's possible. All right, guys, I think I'm going to have to leave you guys now. So I love you guys very much. Don't forget to check out the show on this Wednesday, getting into, let's see, what is this going to be about on Wednesday? We're going to talk with Judy Seeger about cancer detoxification and natural therapy. So that's going to be a good show. So if you know anyone whose body has some extra cells in them that they want to get rid of, make sure to share this show live with your friends and family. I would appreciate that a lot. And again, thank you guys for your support. I really appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed on YouTube yet, make sure to subscribe because we do shows 3 days a week on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. New content all the time happening. And so if you subscribe, there's a little bell somewhere around here too that you should be able to click on, and I think it'll give you a notification because I love it when you guys are in the chat room and chatting and helping each other and stuff. It's just a lot of fun. So there's a bell somewhere around here on YouTube that you can get a notification when we go live. So we're always a few minutes late. I apologize for that. But anyway, thank you guys a lot. Make sure to check out the Extreme Health Academy. Thank you guys for patronizing our store. There's a link to it down in the description below. And there are still some Black Friday deals going on. So there's a Black Friday link in the description of this video too. And make sure to check out the Juve red light that I talked about, the Stockton Aloe 1, and the Relax Far Infrared Sauna if you guys are interested in that, as well as the Magnetico mattress sleep pad. And in our store, we've got tons more stuff going on. So make sure to check out our store if you want to support the work that we do. And if you want to take your health to new levels, check out the Academy. I'm telling you guys, I won't go on and on about it. I'm such a fan of it, and I'm the one that's creating it. It's something that I've been wanting to do and since for 15 years. So I'm very proud of it and very very love the feedback that we've been getting from it. So that's always available to you guys at extremehealthacademy.com. All right, guys, we love you very much. Kate, let me know if you need me to stop anywhere on the way home, and I can stop anywhere that you need. But I'll be leaving here in about 5 minutes. Love you guys very, very much, and we'll see you on Wednesday, 10:45 a.m. Pacific time. And until then, have a great day, and I'll talk to you then. Bye-bye.
No material on this blog is intended to suggest that you should not seek professional medical care. Always work with qualified medical professionals, even if you educate yourself in the field of live food, nutrition, and alternative medicine. I'm not a doctor, nor am I offering readers medical advice of any kind. None of the information offered here should be interpreted as a diagnosis of any disease, nor an attempt to treat or prevent any disease or condition. While information in this blog is discussed in the context of numerous conditions, it can be dangerous to take action based on any information in this blog or to start any health program without first consulting a health professional. The content found here is for informational purposes only and is in no way intended as medical advice, as a substitute for medical counseling, or as a treatment/cure for any disease or health condition, and nor should it be continued as such. Always work with a qualified healthcare professional before making any changes to your diet, prescription drug use, lifestyle, or exercise activities. This information is provided as is, and the reader/viewer assumes all risks from the use, non-use, or misuse